Vanessa's manicured finger jabbed into Emily's collarbone as she screamed for security to throw the sick maid into the blizzard without a coat. And somewhere behind that ballroom door, Damien Moretti was about to find out. And when he did, an empire built on fear was going to shake to its foundations. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and follow this story all the way to the end, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from tonight. I love seeing how far this story travels. Part 1. The wind outside the Moretti estate howled like something alive, clawing at the windows of the grand ballroom where crystal chandeliers threw gold light across 200 of the most dangerous people on the East Coast. Inside, champagne flowed. Outside, the worst storm New York had seen in 11 years was burying the world in white. Emily Carter didn't have time to notice the storm. She had a fever of 101 degrees and 11 more trays of canapes to carry before midnight. "Faster!" snapped the head housekeeper, Mrs. Dunbar, not even looking at her. "Mr. Moretti's guests do not wait." "Yes, ma'am." Emily's voice came out smaller than she wanted. Her hands trembled as she lifted the silver tray, and pain shot through the cut on her palm still raw from washing crystal in scalding water 3 nights ago. She moved through this crowd like a ghost. Nobody looked at her. Nobody ever looked at her. That was the rule she'd learned in 11 months of working in this house. The help doesn't exist unless something goes wrong. Across the room at the head table, Damien Moretti sat in a black tailored suit that cost more than Emily would earn in 2 years, listening to a senator from Albany talk about zoning permits with the bored patience of a man who'd buried people for less annoying conversations. He wasn't really listening. His eyes kept drifting. To her. The maid in the gray uniform, the one who refilled water glasses without being asked, the one who flinched every time someone raised their voice like she expected to be hit. He'd noticed her months ago, not in the way his men whispered about, not like that. He noticed the way she worked until her hands bled and never once complained. He noticed she gave her food to the kitchen boy who was always hungry. He noticed that 3 weeks ago, when she'd had the flu so badly she could barely stand, she'd still shown up at 5 in the morning because she was terrified of losing the job that was paying off her late father's debt. Damien Moretti did not get attached to things. Attachment was a weakness men used against you. He'd learned that lesson with blood. But something about this girl kept breaking his own rule. "Damien." A hand slid onto his arm, manicured nails the color of fresh blood. Vanessa Hale, his fiancée, leaned close, her perfume sharp and expensive. "You're not even listening to Senator Briggs." "I'm listening," Damien said flatly. "You're watching The Help." Vanessa's voice was honey wrapped around a blade. "Again!" Damien turned to her slowly. "Excuse me." "Nothing, darling." She smiled, but her eyes had gone cold, calculating. "I just think it's interesting. The famous Damien Moretti who scares grown men into silence can't stop staring at a maid." "Watch your tone." "Or what?" Vanessa's smile widened, but underneath it something dangerous flickered. She'd seen it building for weeks, the way his attention drifted whenever that girl entered a room. She'd told herself it was nothing. She'd told herself wrong. Across the room, Emily set down a tray of champagne flutes and felt the room tilt slightly. The fever was worse than she'd let on. Her vision blurred at the edges. She gripped the edge of a side table, breathing slowly, willing herself not to collapse in front of 200 guests who would only see an inconvenience, not a sick woman barely standing. "You?" "Maid." Emily's head snapped up. Vanessa stood 3 feet away, arms crossed, eyes glittering with something Emily didn't yet understand was hatred. "Yes, ma'am." "Where's my grandmother's emerald brooch, the one I left on my vanity this afternoon?" Emily's stomach dropped. I haven't seen it, ma'am. I don't go into your private rooms unless—" "Don't lie to me." Vanessa's voice rose sharp enough to cut through nearby conversation. Heads began to turn. "I know exactly what kind of girl you are. Sweet little smile, sad little story, working your way into this house, into him." She jabbed a finger toward Damien without looking at him. "And now my jewelry is missing." "I would never—" Emily's voice cracked, fever and fear tangling together. "Please, I haven't taken anything, I swear." "Security?" Vanessa snapped her fingers, and two men in black suits materialized instantly the way men only do when they've been trained their whole careers to appear the moment a powerful woman raises her voice. "Get her out of my sight!" "Wait!" Emily tried to step back, but a hand closed around her arm hard enough to bruise. "Please, I'm sick. I haven't done anything." "Haven't? Out!" Vanessa's voice was ice now, all pretense of sweetness gone. "Into the storm. Let her sit out there and think about honesty." A ripple of unease moved through the nearby guests, but nobody said a word. Nobody ever said a word in this house. That was how the Moretti estate worked. Fear kept everyone's mouth shut, even when something was clearly horribly wrong. The two security men dragged Emily through the side hallway, her thin shoes sliding against the marble floor as she twisted, trying to break free. "Please, I don't even have a coat. Please just let me explain." "Mrs. Hale's orders," one of the men muttered. Not unkindly, but not stopping either. Orders were orders in this house, and nobody questioned Vanessa Hale, not when she was about to become the next Mrs. Moretti. The heavy side door swung open, and a wall of Arctic wind slammed into Emily's face, stealing the breath from her lungs. Snow swirled in violent sheets, visibility dropping to almost nothing beyond the porch light. "No, please!" Emily grabbed the doorframe with both hands, fingers white with cold and panic. "It's a blizzard, I'll freeze." "Should have thought of that before you stole from her," the second guard said, and pried her fingers loose with practiced ease. The door slammed shut. Emily stood frozen literally and figuratively on the back porch of the Moretti estate, wearing nothing but a thin gray uniform. Her body already shaking uncontrollably from the fever and the cold combining into something dangerous. The wind screamed around her. Snow stung her face like needles. "Hello?" Her voice was swallowed instantly by the storm. "Please, someone—" Nobody came. Nobody. Inside, the Christmas music swelled into a new song. Champagne glasses clinked. Laughter rose and fell like nothing in the world was wrong, because as far as anyone inside knew, nothing was. A maid had disappeared. Maids disappeared all the time. Quit, got fired, moved on. Nobody asked questions about people who didn't matter. Except one man was about to ask exactly that question. Damien had watched the entire exchange from across the ballroom, his jaw tightening with every word Vanessa spat every step those guards took toward Emily. He'd started moving the moment he saw the men grab her arm, but the senator from Albany had chosen that exact second to finally make his point about zoning permits, and three other men had crowded in around Damien with business proposals, congratulations, hands to shake. By the time he extracted himself, Emily was gone. "Where did they take her?" Damien asked Vanessa directly, his voice low and dangerous in a way that made the nearby guests suddenly very interested in their drinks. "Who?" Vanessa blinked innocently. "The maid, Emily." Saying her name out loud felt strange, like admitting something he'd been hiding even from himself. "Where is she?" "Oh, her." Vanessa waved a hand. "She stole from me. I had her removed." "Really, Damien, you shouldn't concern yourself with removed where." Something in his tone made Vanessa's confidence flicker just slightly. "Outside, to think about her actions." "Outside?" Damien repeated the word like it tasted wrong in his mouth. "In this storm." "Damien, it's not that bad." He was already walking away. Outside, Emily's knees had buckled twice already. The cold had moved past painful into something worse, a strange, creeping numbness that some distant, fading part of her brain recognized as dangerous. Hypothermia. She'd read about it once in a magazine at a doctor's office years ago, before her father died, before the debt, before any of this. Confusion, drowsiness. The body's last trick, making freezing feel almost peaceful right before it kills you. She thought of her father. She thought of the promise she'd made at his graveside, that she'd pay off everything he owed, that she'd never let his name carry shame. She thought distantly of how strange it was that she might die in a stranger's backyard over a brooch she'd never even seen. Her legs gave out completely. She sank into the snow beside the frozen garden fountain, and for one terrifying, almost gentle moment, the cold stopped hurting. That was the moment Damien threw open the side door. "Emily!" His voice tore through the storm like a gunshot. He didn't see her at first. The snow was falling too thick, the world reduced to white static, but some instinct, something he would never be able to fully explain afterward, pulled him toward the fountain. He found her half buried, already snow collecting on her eyelashes, her lips tinged faintly blue, her breathing so shallow he had to press 2 fingers to her throat to be sure there was a pulse at all. No, 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 no! Damien's voice cracked in a way none of his men had ever heard, not once, not in 15 years of watching him stay calm while ordering executions. He scooped her up against his chest, his $3,000 tuxedo jacket instantly soaked through, and he didn't care. He didn't feel the cold at all anymore. He only felt the terrifying lightness of her body and the way her head lolled against his shoulder. "Stay with me," he ordered her, as if she could hear him, as if commands worked on a body shutting down from cold. "Emily, stay with me." He carried her back toward the house, kicking the door open with his foot, and the warmth and light and music hit him like an assault after the silence of the storm. The room went quiet the instant they saw him. Damien Moretti, the man who never showed weakness, who had built an empire on the principle that fear was the only currency that mattered, stood in the doorway of his own Christmas banquet, soaked to the bone snow melting in his hair, cradling a half-frozen maid in his arms, like she was the only thing left in the world worth saving. 200 of the most powerful, most dangerous people on the East Coast stared in absolute frozen silence. "Someone call a doctor," Damien said, his voice low and shaking with a fury none of them had ever heard directed at the room itself. "Now." Nobody moved for a full 3 seconds, stunned into paralysis. "Now." The word exploded out of him, and the entire ballroom flinched as one. Chaos erupted, guests scrambling, staff running, someone shouting for the family physician, who was fortunately among the guests. Damien carried Emily straight through the center of the ballroom, past the senator, past the rival family bosses, past everyone who mattered in his world, and laid her gently on the long banquet table itself, sweeping silverware and crystal to the floor with one arm. "Damien, what are you doing?" Vanessa's voice, shrill and disbelieving, cut through the chaos. He turned to her, and the look on his face made even the hardened crime bosses in the room take an involuntary step back. "You did this." His voice was quiet now, which was somehow worse than shouting. "You put her outside, in this. She stole from me. She's been running a fever for 3 days, and you threw her into a blizzard without a coat over a brooch you probably misplaced yourself." Damien's hands were shaking, whether from cold or rage. Even he couldn't say. "Do you understand what you almost did? Damien, please, you're embarrassing yourself in front of—" "I don't care who's watching." He said it loud enough for the entire ballroom to hear, every senator, every rival boss, every alliance he'd spent years building. "I do not care." Dr. Hensley, the family physician, pushed through the crowd with his bag already open, immediately checking Emily's pulse, her breathing peeling back her eyelids to check her pupils with a small flashlight. "Severe hypothermia," he announced grimly. "We need to warm her slowly, get her out of these wet clothes, and get fluids into her immediately. Another 20 minutes out there and we'd be having a very different conversation." The words landed on Damien like a physical blow. 20 minutes. He'd come that close to losing her without ever even telling her she mattered. "Take her to the East Guest Suite," Damien ordered, his voice steadier now, control reasserting itself, even as something inside him had fundamentally shifted, cracked open, rearranged. "I want a nurse with her around the clock. I want updates every 30 minutes. As his men carefully carried Emily upstairs, Damien turned back to the ballroom, to 200 faces watching him with a mixture of shock, calculation, and in some cases barely concealed amusement at finally seeing the untouchable Damien Moretti rattled. "The engagement is off," Damien said to Vanessa, loud enough for the entire room to absorb. "We're done. You cannot be serious." "Oh, I have never been more serious in my life." He stepped closer, his voice dropping to something cold and final. "You tried to kill someone in my house tonight, someone under my protection. I don't care whose daughter you are or what families you represent. That is unforgivable." Vanessa's face cycled through shock fury, and finally, something darker. Calculation, the look of a woman recalculating every plan she'd built around this engagement, around this alliance, around this entire night. "You'll regret this," she said quietly, just for him. "You have no idea what you're throwing away." I have no idea what I almost let happen, Damien corrected. That's the only thing I regret. He turned to address the room at large, every mafia boss, every dirty politician, every businessman who'd built their fortune on the same foundation of fear and silence that Damien had inherited from his father. Anyone who harms someone under my protection becomes my enemy. I don't care if it's a maid, a guard, or a guest in this house. That rule doesn't change tonight, and it doesn't change for anyone in this room. The silence that followed was absolute. One by one, the rival families began making their excuses, gathering coats, calling for cars, despite the storm still raging outside. The carefully constructed Christmas alliance, months of negotiation, years of careful relationship building, was dissolving in real time, guest by guest, car by car, pulling away into the snow. Damien didn't care. He watched them go with the same flat, unreadable expression he wore during business negotiations. But his mind was already upstairs, already with the fragile, freezing woman who'd somehow, without trying, without even knowing it, become the only thing in that entire mansion he actually couldn't stand to lose. Sir. One of his lieutenants, Marco, approached carefully. The Castellano family just left. The Reyes brothers, too. This is going to cost us, Damien. Months of work gone in one night. I know. And Vanessa's father. I know Marco. Was it worth it? Marco asked quietly, genuinely curious, not challenging. Damien looked toward the staircase, toward the east wing, where Emily was fighting her way back from the edge of something that had nearly taken her tonight. Ask me again in 20 minutes, he said, when I know if she's going to live. He climbed the stairs two at a time, leaving behind the wreckage of an alliance, the fury of a woman scorned, and the whispered speculation of an entire criminal underworld that would by morning know exactly what had happened in the Moretti mansion on Christmas Eve. Outside, the storm continued raging, indifferent to empires rising or falling. Inside the East guest suite, a nurse worked quickly to warm Emily's body, wrapping her in heated blankets, monitoring her vitals with careful, practiced hands. Damien stood in the doorway, unable to make himself enter further, watching the rise and fall of her chest, with a desperation that frightened him more than any rival ever had. Mr. Moretti, the nurse said gently, not looking up from her work, you should change out of those wet clothes. You'll catch your death standing there. I'm fine. Sir, I said I'm fine. His voice cracked slightly on the last word, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, Damien Moretti didn't try to hide it. He pulled a chair beside the bed and sat down, still soaked, still freezing, and took Emily's small, cold hand between both of his own, as if his warmth alone might be enough to pull her back from wherever the storm had nearly taken her. You don't get to do this, he said quietly to a woman who couldn't hear him, whose eyes remained closed, whose breathing remained shallow and uncertain. You don't get to almost die in my backyard and not wake up to tell me why you never once asked me for help. Outside, the snow kept falling, burying the mansion, burying the road, burying the careful, fearful world Damien Moretti had built for himself, a world about to be torn wide open by a woman who had never once in 11 months of working in his house demanded anything from anyone. The fever broke just after 2 a.m. Emily's eyes fluttered open to find a man she barely knew sitting beside her bed, his tuxedo jacket discarded, his shirt sleeves rolled up, his eyes red-rimmed with exhaustion, and something that looked almost like fear. Mr. Moretti, her voice came out as barely a whisper. Don't, he said, his voice rough. Don't apologize. Don't thank me. Just don't ever scare me like that again. Emily blinked slowly, confusion fighting through the fog of fever and cold. What happened? You almost died, Damien said simply. Outside, in the snow, because Vanessa accused you of stealing something you never touched. The memory crashed back into her all at once. The cold, the door slamming, the fear that she would freeze to death over a piece of jewelry she'd never even seen. Her hands began to shake. It's okay, Damien said quickly, his voice softening into something Emily had never heard from him before, something almost gentle. You're safe now. Nobody is going to hurt you again. I promise you that. Why? The question slipped out before Emily could stop it. Why does it matter to you? Damien was quiet for a long moment, staring down at her hand still resting between both of his. I don't know yet, he admitted finally, his voice barely above a whisper. But it does. More than I ever expected it to. Outside, the storm was finally beginning to break, the first hints of dawn pressing weakly against the thick gray clouds. But inside the Moretti mansion, something else entirely was just beginning. A fracture in the careful, fearful world Damien had built. A question neither of them yet understood the full weight of, and a betrayal still hidden somewhere within these walls that would in the coming days threaten to destroy everything either of them had left. 3 days passed before Emily was strong enough to leave the bed, and in those 3 days, Damien Moretti barely slept. He sat in that chair more nights than not, working from his laptop balanced on his knees, taking calls in a whisper so he wouldn't wake her, watching the rise and fall of her breathing, the way other men watched stock tickers. His lieutenants noticed. His housekeeper noticed. Vanessa, banished to her family's estate 2 hours north, noticed most of all, even from a distance, even through the cold silence of a phone that Damien refused to answer. "You look terrible," Emily told him on the 4th morning, her voice stronger now, color returned to her cheeks. "Have you slept at all?" "I sleep fine." He didn't look up from his laptop. "You're lying." That got his attention. He glanced up, one eyebrow raised, something almost like amusement flickering across his face for the first time in days. "Careful, people don't usually call me a liar." "Someone should." Emily pushed herself up against the pillows, wincing slightly at the lingering ache in her muscles. "You've been sitting in that chair for 3 days like you're guarding me from something." "Maybe I am." The words hung in the air between them, heavier than either of them expected. Emily looked away, first her cheeks flushing with something that had nothing to do with the fever. "Mr. Moretti." "Damien," he corrected quietly. "After what happened, I think we're past Mr. Moretti." "Damien," she repeated, testing the name like it belonged to a different world than the one she'd been living in for 11 months. "I need to go back to work. Mrs. Dunbar will have given my room to someone else by now, and I still owe—" "You're not going anywhere near that side of the house," Damien said, his voice suddenly hard, final. "Not until I figure out exactly what happened that night, and not until I'm certain it can't happen again." "What do you mean, figure out what happened? Vanessa accused me of stealing. I know what happened." Damien set his laptop aside slowly, his expression shifting into something more careful, more calculating. "Vanessa accused you of stealing a brooch that as of yesterday was found exactly where it always is, in her jewelry box, untouched." Emily's breath caught. "She lied." "She lied," Damien confirmed. "Which means either she planned this from the start, or someone gave her a reason to believe you'd taken something you never touched." "Why would anyone do that?" "That," Damien said grimly, "is what I intend to find out." He stood pacing toward the window where weak winter sunlight filtered through clouds still heavy with the aftermath of the storm. 11 months you've worked in this house, Emily. 11 months of staying invisible, staying quiet, never once asking for anything. And the one time something happens to you, it happens in front of 200 witnesses, orchestrated specifically to humiliate you in the worst possible way. You think it was planned. I think Vanessa didn't act alone. He turned back to face her, his jaw tight. I think someone wanted you out of this house, and they used her jealousy to do it. Emily's stomach twisted. Who would want me gone? I'm nobody. I clean floors and carry trays. I'm not a threat to anyone. That's exactly what worries me, Damien said quietly, because somebody clearly disagrees. A knock interrupted them, sharp, urgent. Marco Damien's lieutenant stepped inside without waiting for permission, his face tight with the particular tension that meant trouble. Boss, we need to talk. Now. Damien glanced at Emily, an unspoken apology in his eyes, before following Marco into the hallway. Emily strained to hear through the partially closed door, catching fragments, financial records, missing files. Someone's name she didn't recognize, the word breach repeated twice with rising urgency. When Damien returned 10 minutes later, his face had gone grim in a way that made Emily's stomach tighten with dread. What happened? Someone's been moving money, Damien said slowly, sitting back down, running a hand through his hair. Small amounts over months funneled through accounts that shouldn't exist. We just found discrepancies in the household ledgers going back almost a year. A year. Emily's mind raced. That's around when I started working here. It's not you. Damien said immediately firmly. "I already know it's not you. You don't have access to those accounts, and frankly, Emily, if you were stealing from me, you wouldn't still be wearing shoes with holes in the soles." Despite everything, a small surprised laugh escaped her. "You noticed my shoes. I notice everything about you." The admission seemed to surprise him as much as her, and he looked away quickly, clearing his throat. "That's not the point. The point is someone in this house has been stealing quietly, carefully for almost a year, and I'm starting to think Vanessa's little stunt with you wasn't jealousy at all." "What was it then?" "A distraction." Damien's eyes hardened. "Someone needed chaos. Someone needed everyone looking at you, at the scandal, at the broken engagement, anywhere except the household accounts." The pieces clicked together in Emily's mind with horrifying clarity. "Mrs. Dunbar." Damien went very still. "Why would you say that name?" "Because she's the only person besides you with full access to the household budget," Emily said slowly, her exhaustion forgotten, replaced by sharp, urgent focus. "I've seen her in the financial office at strange hours, late at night, when she thought everyone was asleep. I never thought anything of it because why would I? She's worked for your family for 15 years. 16. Damien corrected automatically, his mind already racing ahead. "My father trusted her completely. Maybe that's exactly why nobody ever checked." Damien stood abruptly, already reaching for his phone, already barking orders to Marco through the door, pull every record connected to Dunbar, every account, every transaction quietly without alerting her. Emily watched him transform in real time, the careful, gentle man who'd sat beside her bed for 3 days, disappearing, replaced by the calculating, dangerous boss whose reputation had built an empire. "Damien!" She caught his sleeve before he could leave the room entirely. "Be careful. If she's involved in something this serious, she's not working alone." He paused, looking down at her hand on his arm, something complicated passing behind his eyes. "Since when do you worry about my safety?" "Since you carried me through a blizzard instead of letting me die in your backyard," Emily said simply. "I think that earns you a little worrying." Something shifted in his expression, softening despite the danger circling them both. "I'll be careful," he promised. "Stay here. Don't leave this room until I come back." The investigation moved faster than Emily expected. By that evening, Marco had pulled financial records spanning 14 months, cross-referencing every transaction against household staff schedules, supplier invoices, and bank routing numbers that led eventually, frustratingly, to dead ends. Shell companies' offshore accounts, names that didn't exist anywhere except on paper. "Whoever set this up knew what they were doing," Marco reported, spreading printouts across Damien's desk. "This isn't some housekeeper skimming cash from the grocery budget. This is sophisticated. Someone with real financial knowledge." "Dunbar doesn't have that kind of knowledge," Damien said, frustration bleeding into his voice. "She barely knows how to use a computer." "Then someone's using her," Marco said. "Or someone's working through her, without her even knowing." Damien's head snapped up. "Explain!" "What if she's not the mastermind? What if she's just the access point? Someone needed eyes and ears inside this house. Someone with authority who wouldn't be questioned. Dunbar fits that perfectly. But the actual financial maneuvering..." Marco tapped one of the printouts. "This has fingerprints all over it that don't belong to a 60-year-old housekeeper." "Whose fingerprints, then?" Marco hesitated, glancing toward the hallway, as if checking for listeners before he spoke. "Boss, I don't like saying this without more proof, but the offshore account structure, it's almost identical to one we traced 2 years ago, back when we were dealing with the Castellano situation." Damien's blood ran cold. "The Castellanos left my house an hour after I broke the engagement." "I know. You think they're involved in this?" "I think it's too coincidental to ignore," Marco said carefully. "And I think Vanessa's father has been awfully quiet since his daughter got humiliated in front of 200 people. A man like that doesn't stay quiet unless he's already planning his next move." The implications hit Damien like a physical blow. If the Hale family and the Castellano family were connected to this financial breach, then Vanessa's accusation against Emily hadn't just been petty jealousy. It had been a calculated first strike in something much larger, much more dangerous. "Get me everything you can find on Vanessa's father's recent business dealings," Damien ordered. "Every meeting, every phone call, every flight he's taken in the last 6 months. That's going to take time and resources we'd normally use elsewhere." "Make it happen, Marco. I don't care what it costs." As Marco left to begin the deeper investigation, Damien sat alone in his study, the weight of what was unfolding settling heavily across his shoulders. A betrayal inside his own house. A possible alliance between two families plotting against him. And in the middle of it all, an innocent maid who'd nearly died because someone needed a distraction. He thought about Emily upstairs, finally resting, finally safe, or so he hoped. The thought of anyone using her again, hurting her again, made something cold and lethal coil in his chest. He found himself walking back toward the east wing before he'd consciously decided to move. Emily was awake when he entered, sitting up in bed with a book she clearly wasn't reading, her eyes immediately finding his face, searching for answers. "What did you find?" "More questions than answers," Damien admitted, sitting heavily in the chair beside her bed. "Marco thinks Dunbar might not be working alone. He thinks this could be connected to the Castellano family." Emily's eyes widened. "The family that left during the banquet." "The same." "Do you think Vanessa knew about the money, I mean? Do you think that's why she wanted me gone?" "I don't know," Damien said honestly, "but I intend to find out. Carefully, without anyone realizing we're looking." Emily was quiet for a long moment, her fingers twisting the edge of the blanket. "There's something I should tell you, something I didn't think mattered until just now." Damien leaned forward. "Tell me." "About 2 months ago, I was cleaning the upstairs study. Mrs. Dunbar's private office, the one she keeps locked most of the time. The door was open because she'd stepped out and I saw her on the phone. She was speaking quietly, almost like she didn't want anyone to hear, even though she thought she was alone." "What did she say?" "I only caught a few words before she noticed me and slammed the door. Something about timing, something about waiting until after the holidays, and she said a name." Emily's brow furrowed, concentrating. "Hale. She said the name Hale." Damien's expression turned to stone. "You're certain?" "I'm certain. I remember because it struck me as strange. Why would the housekeeper be on personal terms with your fiancé's family?" "She wouldn't be," Damien said grimly. "Not unless something else was going on." He stood abruptly, his mind already racing through implications, connections, a conspiracy taking shape in real time that was far larger and more dangerous than a simple theft. If Dunbar had been coordinating with the Hale family for months planning timing around the holidays, then Vanessa's accusation against Emily hadn't been impulsive jealousy at all. It had been the opening move in a calculated plan. "Damien," Emily's voice pulled him back. "If they're working together, if this was planned, what happens now?" "Now," Damien said, his voice low and dangerous. "I find out exactly how deep this goes, and I make sure nobody in this house ever threatens what's mine again." The word hung between them, mine, and Emily felt her pulse quicken, uncertain whether it was fear or something else entirely. 2 days later, Damien called Mrs. Dunbar into his study under the pretense of discussing post-holiday household logistics. Marco waited in the adjoining room, recording equipment ready, while Damien sat behind his desk, his expression carefully neutral, giving away nothing. "You wanted to see me, Mr. Moretti?" Dunbar's voice carried its usual brisk efficiency, no hint of nerves, no sign that anything was wrong. "Sit down, Margaret." Using her first name was deliberate, calculated to disarm her. She sat smoothing her skirt with practiced composure. "Is this about the budget reports? I've already submitted everything for the quarter." "It's about Vanessa Hale." Something flickered across Dunbar's face, small, almost imperceptible, but Damien had spent his entire life reading micro-expressions for a living, and he caught it instantly. A flash of calculation, a recalculation of how much he knew. "What about her?" Dunbar's voice remained steady, but her hands had stilled in her lap. "I'm curious how long you've known her family," Damien said casually, watching her closely. "Since you seem to be on personal enough terms to discuss timing with them." The color drained from Dunbar's face. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't you?" Damien leaned forward slightly. "Because I have a witness who overheard you on the phone discussing waiting until after the holidays, discussing the name Hale specifically. That's absurd. I would never. I also have 14 months of financial discrepancies running through this household's accounts. Damien continued, his voice growing colder with each word. Shell companies, offshore transfers, money disappearing in amounts small enough that nobody would notice unless they were looking very, very carefully. Dunbar's composure cracked completely. I can explain, then explain. It's not what you think, she said, her voice shaking now, all pretense abandoned. I didn't have a choice. They threatened my family, Damien. My grandson, he's sick. The medical bills were destroying us, and Mr. Hale offered you money to betray my family. He offered me a way to save my grandson's life. Dunbar's voice broke. What was I supposed to do? Let him die because I was too loyal to a family that's never once asked how I was doing in 16 years of service? The accusation landed harder than Dunbar probably intended, and for a moment, something almost like guilt flickered across Damien's face. He'd never asked. 16 years of service, and he'd never once asked Margaret Dunbar how her family was doing. But guilt didn't excuse betrayal. What exactly did you give them? Financial records, schedules, information about the Christmas banquet guest lists, security arrangements. Dunbar was crying now, the careful mask of efficient housekeeper completely gone. And the girl, Emily. They wanted her gone before the banquet removed somehow, and I told them about Vanessa's jealousy, told them how to use it. You set her up to nearly die in a blizzard. Damien's voice had gone dangerously quiet. I didn't know it would go that far. I thought Vanessa would just have her fired, sent away quietly. I didn't know about the storm. I didn't know she'd... Dunbar's voice cracked completely. I'm sorry. God help me, I'm so sorry. Why did they want Emily gone specifically? This was the question that mattered most, the one Damien needed answered above all else. What does a maid have to do with the Hale and Castellano families' financial schemes? Dunbar hesitated, and for a moment Damien thought she might refuse to answer. Then something in her seemed to collapse entirely. Because she's not just a maid, Dunbar whispered. I don't know everything. They didn't tell me everything, but I know enough to understand they're terrified of what she might remember, what she might have seen working in this house all these months. Damien's blood went cold. Seen what? I don't know specifics, but Emily's worked in nearly every part of this estate over the past year. She's cleaned offices, organized files, been present during conversations nobody thought twice about, because nobody thinks twice about the help. Dunbar wiped at her eyes. Mr. Hale was very specific that she needed to be removed from this house before the banquet one way or another. I assumed it was simple prejudice. I didn't understand until just now that it might be something far more serious. Damien sat back slowly, the full shape of the conspiracy beginning to take terrifying form in his mind. This wasn't just about money. This wasn't just about a housekeeper's desperation or a fiancé's jealousy. Someone believed Emily Carter knew something dangerous, something worth orchestrating an elaborate scheme to silence, possibly even kill. Marco, Damien called, and his lieutenant entered immediately from the adjoining room, expression grim. You got all of that? Every word. Margaret. Damien turned back to the trembling housekeeper. I'm not going to pretend what you did wasn't a betrayal. People could have died because of the information you sold. Emily nearly did die. I know, and I'll accept whatever punishment you decide, but I understand desperation. Damien continued, his voice softening slightly, surprising even himself. I'll cover your grandson's medical bills, all of them. In exchange, you're going to tell us everything you know, and you're going to help us figure out exactly what Hale and Castellano are planning. Dunbar stared at him, shock washing across her tear-streaked face. Why would you help me after what I've done? Because revenge doesn't pay your grandson's hospital bills, Damien said simply. And because right now I need every advantage I can get to protect the people in this house. That includes understanding exactly what we're facing. It took another hour of careful, methodical questioning before Dunbar had revealed everything she knew. Fragments of conversations, names of associates, details about meetings she'd overheard but never fully understood. By the time she finished, Damien and Marco had assembled enough pieces to understand they were facing something far larger than a simple betrayal. Haley and Castellano weren't just disgruntled families seeking revenge for a broken engagement. They were planning something coordinated, something that had been in motion for months before Christmas Eve ever arrived, and Emily Carter, quiet and visible. Emily Carter was somehow at the center of it. Damien found her in the small library on the second floor, curled in a window seat, with a blanket around her shoulders, watching snow fall steadily outside. She'd been moved from the guest suite that morning, declared fully recovered by Dr. Hensley, though Damien noted she still moved carefully, still tired easily. "We need to talk," he said, and something in his tone made Emily set down her book, immediately giving him her full attention. What happened with Dunbar? He told her everything, the confession, the threats against her grandson, the connection to Hale, and finally the terrifying revelation that someone believed Emily knew something dangerous. Emily's face went pale as she listened. "That doesn't make sense. I don't know anything. I clean rooms, I organize files. I've never even paid attention to half of what crosses my desk, because none of it concerns me." "Think carefully," Damien urged, sitting across from her. "Has anything ever seemed strange? Any documents you've seen, any conversations you've overheard, anything that didn't quite fit?" Emily closed her eyes, forcing herself to think back through 11 months of mostly forgettable, repetitive work. Most days blurred together, dusting, organizing, carrying trays, staying invisible. But slowly, carefully, fragments began surfacing. "There was a file," she said slowly, her eyes opening, brow furrowed in concentration. "About 4 months ago in your father's old study, the one nobody uses anymore. I was organizing boxes for storage, and I found a folder that seemed out of place. Financial documents, but old, predating the household records I usually see." "What kind of financial documents?" Property transfers, I think. Land deeds. I didn't understand most of it, but I remember the names because they seemed unusual together. Your family's name alongside the Castellano family's name on documents dated almost 20 years ago. Damien went very still. 20 years ago, my father was still building this empire. The Castellanos were rivals then, not allies. There was something else, Emily continued, the memory sharpening now that she was actively searching for it. A clause, I think, about territory boundaries, and a third name I didn't recognize. Something like Reeves or Reyes. I'm not certain. I only glanced at it before putting it back in the box. "Reyes," Damien repeated slowly. "The Reyes brothers were at the banquet. They left right after the Castellanos did." "Could that mean something?" "It could mean everything." Damien stood abruptly, pacing toward the window, his mind racing through implications that were beginning to form a clear, terrifying picture. If there's an old agreement between my father, the Castellanos, and the Reyes family, something involving territory, something that predates my taking over the business, and that information surfaced now, right before Christmas, right before this banquet, meant to solidify new alliances. Someone might be trying to expose an old secret, Emily finished, understanding dawning in her eyes. Something that could destroy current alliances if it came to light. Or something that could be used as leverage, Damien said grimly. Blackmail, threats, a way to control families who think they're operating independently. "And you think I might have seen something that proves whatever this agreement was?" "I think," Damien said, slowly turning back to face her, "that you might be the only person alive who's seen physical proof of something certain people would kill to keep buried." The weight of that realization settled heavily over both of them. Emily wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the blanket, despite the warm fire crackling nearby. "What do we do?" "First," Damien said, his voice firm with renewed purpose, "we find that file. If it still exists, if Dunbar or anyone else hasn't already destroyed it, we need it as proof. And if it's already gone, then we find another way to expose whatever they're planning before they can use it against us." Damien's expression hardened with determination. "Either way, Emily, I need you to understand something. You're not just a maid who got caught in the crossfire of someone else's jealousy anymore. You're a target, a real one, and I intend to make sure nothing happens to you." "Why?" The question came out softer this time, more vulnerable. "Why does protecting me matter so much to you? You barely knew I existed 11 months ago." Damien was quiet for a long moment, studying her face with an intensity that made her breath catch. "I think I knew you existed the very first week you started working here," he admitted finally. "I just didn't let myself think about it. Didn't let myself notice the way you always put everyone else first, the way you never once asked for anything, despite working harder than people who earn 10 times your salary. I told myself it didn't matter, told myself attachment was a weakness I couldn't afford. What changed? You almost died in my backyard. And for the first time in my entire life, I understood exactly what people meant when they said their world stopped." Damien's voice was rough with an honesty that clearly cost him something to admit. "I don't know what this is yet, Emily. I don't have a name for it. But I know I'm not letting anyone hurt you again, and I know I'm not letting whatever conspiracy is unfolding in this house touch you without fighting back with everything I have." Emily felt tears pricking at her eyes, overwhelmed by an honesty she hadn't expected from a man whose entire identity had been built on careful control and emotional distance. "Then let's find that file," she said, steadying her voice with effort. "Let's find out exactly what we're fighting." They spent the next several hours in the old study surrounded by dust-covered boxes that hadn't been opened in years, searching methodically through documents that spanned decades of Moretti family history. Marco joined them, eventually bringing additional security as Damien's paranoia about who else might be watching, who else might be working against them intensified with every passing hour. It was nearly midnight when Emily's fingers closed around a familiar folder, slightly yellowed with age, tucked inside a box labeled simply Personal 2006. "This is it," she breathed, her hands trembling slightly as she opened the folder. "This is the file I saw before." Damien leaned over her shoulder, scanning the documents quickly, his expression shifting from anticipation to genuine shock as the contents became clear. "This isn't just a territory agreement," he said slowly, disbelief coloring his voice. "This is evidence that my father, Castellano, and Reyes conspired together to frame a rival family for crimes they didn't commit. The Bianchi family. They were eliminated from the territory entirely 20 years ago, accused of betraying an alliance that, according to this, never actually existed. They destroyed an entire family based on a lie," Emily said, horror dawning across her face. "And if this came to light..." Damien continued, his mind racing through implications. Every family currently allied with the Castellanos or Reyes would learn they've been partnering with people capable of orchestrating that level of betrayal. The entire current power structure could collapse. That's why they wanted this file gone, Emily realized. And that's why they wanted me gone too, just in case I remembered seeing it, just in case I could ever connect the pieces. "This isn't just leverage anymore," Damien said grimly, closing the folder carefully. "This is enough evidence to start a war between every major family on the East Coast, depending on who gets their hands on it first and how it's used." Marco, who'd been listening silently, finally spoke. "Boss, we need to think very carefully about our next move. If word gets out that we have this, every family connected to the original conspiracy is going to come after us with everything they've got." "I know. And if we don't use it," Marco continued, "Castellano and Reyes will eventually realize Emily might remember seeing it, and they'll come after her again more carefully, this time more permanently." The implication hung heavy in the room. Emily felt her stomach drop, understanding finally crystallizing into terrifying clarity. She wasn't just caught in the crossfire of a power struggle anymore. She was now undeniably the most dangerous loose end in a conspiracy 2 decades in the making. "There has to be a way to use this without starting an all-out war," Emily said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "A way to protect ourselves without destroying everything." Damien looked at her for a long moment, something shifting behind his eyes, calculation, protectiveness, and something else entirely, something that looked almost like admiration. "You're right," he said slowly. "There is a way. But it's going to require careful planning, and it's going to require trusting people I haven't trusted in years." "Who?" "The Crime Commission." Damien said the words clearly costing him something significant to speak aloud. "If we present this evidence the right way through the right channels, we don't start a war. We expose a conspiracy that wronged an entire family, and we let the commission itself decide how to handle Castellano and Reyes." Will they believe it? After 20 years. They'll believe documentation, Damien said grimly, especially documentation this detailed with signatures, dates, financial records that corroborate every claim. The commission doesn't forgive families who fabricate evidence to eliminate rivals. If we can prove this conclusively, Castellano and Reyes won't just lose this fight. They'll lose everything. And Vanessa? Damien's expression hardened further. Vanessa made her choice the moment she helped throw you into that storm. Whatever happens to her family happens because of decisions they made long before tonight. Emily nodded slowly, understanding, settling over her with the weight of everything that had unfolded in the past week. A simple maid's job, 11 months of staying invisible, had somehow positioned her at the exact center of a conspiracy capable of reshaping the entire criminal underworld of the East Coast. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. Damien closed the folder carefully, his expression resolute. "Now we prepare. Carefully, methodically, without giving Castellano or Reyes any indication that we know what they're planning. And when the time is right, we expose everything and we make absolutely certain that nobody in this house ever has to live in fear again." Outside, snow continued falling steadily against the windows, blanketing the estate in deceptive peace. But inside the foundations of an empire built on decades of secrets were beginning finally irreversibly to crack, and Emily Carter, the maid, nobody had ever truly seen, was about to become the very reason that empire either survived or fell completely. The plan took shape over the next 3 days, each hour stretched tight with tension as Damien and Marco worked to build an airtight case while keeping every move hidden from the families, now circling like wolves around the Moretti estate. Emily insisted on helping despite Damien's repeated objections. "You almost died 2 weeks ago," he reminded her for what felt like the 10th time, watching her sort through copies of the financial documents at his desk. "You should be resting, not digging through 20-year-old conspiracy files. I'm the only one who actually remembers what the original file looked like before it got disturbed," Emily countered without looking up. "If something's missing, if something's been altered, I'm the one who'd notice." "That's not the point." "Then what is the point, Damien?" She finally looked up, exhaustion and stubbornness fighting for dominance in her expression. "That I sit upstairs and wait while you handle everything. I'm already involved. I have been since the moment Vanessa decided I was disposable. Hiding in a guest room isn't going to change that." Damien opened his mouth to argue, then closed it again, recognizing the particular look in her eyes. The same look she'd had standing on that frozen porch, refusing to simply accept what was happening to her, even as the cold stole the strength from her legs. "Fine," he said finally. "But you don't leave this house without me or Marco. Not for anything. Deal." It was during one of these long nights, surrounded by financial records and old photographs, that Emily found the second piece of the puzzle, one that would change everything they thought they understood. "Damien," her voice had gone strange, tight, with something between confusion and dawning horror. "Come look at this." He crossed the study, quickly leaning over her shoulder to see what she'd found, a photograph faded with age tucked behind the financial documents in the same box. 4 men stood together, arms around shoulders, in the casual camaraderie of old friends, dated in faint pencil on the back, summer 2006. "That's my father," Damien said slowly, recognizing the man on the left, despite the photograph's age. "And that's Castellano younger before the gray hair. And Reyes. Who's the 4th man?" Damien studied the unfamiliar face for a long moment, brow furrowed in concentration, before something clicked into place with visible shock. "That's Frank Bianchi. The family that was destroyed. He's not just standing with them," Damien said, his voice tightening with realization. "Look at his expression. Look at the way he's standing. This isn't a photograph of rivals being civil for some public event. This is 4 men who were genuinely close, friends. Then why would your father and the others frame him?" Damien flipped the photograph over again, studying the faded handwriting, then turned his attention back to the financial documents spread across the desk, cross-referencing dates with sudden sharpening focus. "Because of this," he said, finally pulling out a separate document Emily hadn't noticed before, tucked into an inner folder. "A territorial dispute Bianchi controlled the northern shipping routes, the most profitable territory on the East Coast at the time. My father Castellano and Reyes wanted it. So they fabricated evidence to eliminate a friend. Worse. Damien's jaw tightened as he read further, his expression cycling through disbelief and rage. According to this, Bianchi discovered something dangerous about the other three families' evidence of their own crimes, serious enough to destroy all of them if exposed. They didn't frame him over territory. They framed him to silence him before he could expose what he knew. The parallel hit Emily like a physical blow. That's exactly what's happening now, with me. Damien looked up sharply, the same horrifying realization crossing his face. History repeating itself. 20 years later, almost the same pattern. Someone discovers dangerous information and the families involved eliminate the threat before it can spread. Except Bianchi didn't survive, Emily said quietly. What happened to him? Damien's expression darkened further as he scanned the remaining documents. Exiled. Stripped of territory, family name destroyed, forced out of the business entirely under threat of execution if he ever returned or spoke publicly about what really happened. He paused, reading further, his face going pale. He had a daughter, 16 years old at the time. What happened to her? The records don't say, but if the Bianchi family was completely destroyed, erased from every official record, Damien trailed off the implications, too dark to fully voice. A sharp knock interrupted them. Marco entered without waiting, his expression urgent enough to immediately silence whatever conversation had been happening. "Boss, we have a problem, a big one." "What now?" "Emily's grandfather." Marco's eyes flicked toward Emily, apologetic but firm. "The man who raised her. He's missing." The world seemed to tilt sideways for Emily, the documents in front of her blurring as panic surged through her chest. "What do you mean missing? I spoke to him yesterday. He's fine. He's at home." "He's not at home anymore," Marco said gently. "Two of our men did a routine check after we identified Emily as a target just to make sure he was safe. His house was empty, signs of a struggle. A neighbor reported seeing two unfamiliar cars in the driveway around dinner time." "No." Emily's voice cracked, the document in her hands falling unnoticed to the floor. "No, this isn't. He has nothing to do with any of this. He's just an old man. He never even—" "Emily." Damien's hands found her shoulders steady and firm, anchoring her against the rising panic. "Look at me. We're going to find him. I promise you, we're going to find him." "They took him because of me," Emily whispered, tears spilling despite her attempt to hold them back. "Because I know about the file, because I might remember something." "They took him as leverage," Damien corrected grimly. Already moving into action, already barking orders at Marco for surveillance footage, phone records, anything that might indicate where the kidnappers had gone. Which means they want something in exchange. Probably the file, probably your silence. "Then give it to them," Emily said immediately, desperately. "I don't care about exposing 20-year-old conspiracies. I don't care about the commission. I just want him back safely." "We're not giving them anything until we know exactly what we're dealing with," Damien said firmly, though his eyes held genuine sympathy for her panic. "Marco, get every available man on this. I want eyes on every property connected to Castellano and Reyes within 2 hours." The next several hours blurred together in a haze of frantic activity, phone calls, surveillance reports, maps spread across every available surface, as Damien's men worked to trace any sign of where Emily's grandfather might have been taken. Emily paced the study relentlessly, unable to sit still, unable to think about anything except the elderly man who'd raised her after her parents died, who'd never once asked for anything despite struggling with his own health and finances. "He has a heart condition," she said, suddenly stopping mid-pace. "If they're not careful with his medication, if he's stressed, we'll find him before that becomes a problem," Damien said, though the tightness in his own voice betrayed how little control he actually had over that promise. "You don't understand." Emily pressed panic, sharpening her voice. 2 years ago, he had a cardiac episode just from the stress of a car accident he wasn't even badly hurt in. If they're rough with him, if they scare him... Emily. Damien crossed the room and took both her hands firmly in his. "I need you to breathe. I need you focused, because right now, your memory and your instincts are the sharpest tool we have. Panicking helps nobody, least of all him." She nodded shakily, forcing air into her lungs, forcing her mind to still, even as terror clawed at the edges of her composure. It was nearly 2 a.m. when Marco finally returned with information that shifted everything. "We found a property," he announced, spreading a map across the desk. "Registered under a shell company, but the paper trail leads back to Reyes. It's about 40 minutes outside the city, isolated, minimal security based on what we could observe from a distance." "How minimal?" "4 guards that we counted, possibly more inside." Marco's expression turned grim. "Boss, I have to say this, even though I know you won't like it. A direct assault is risky. If they panic, if they think we're attacking instead of negotiating, Emily's grandfather could end up as collateral damage." "I know. There's something else." Marco hesitated, glancing toward Emily before continuing. "We intercepted a message. They're not just holding him as leverage for the file. They want a meeting, tomorrow night. Reyes wants to negotiate directly." "Negotiate what exactly?" "The file, obviously, but also—" Marco's jaw tightened. They specifically mentioned wanting Emily present at the meeting. Damien's entire body went rigid with fury. "Absolutely not. They were very clear, boss. No Emily, no negotiation, and no guarantee about the old man's safety." "It's a trap," Damien said immediately. "They're using her grandfather to lure her into a vulnerable position." "I know that," Marco agreed. "But if we refuse entirely, we lose any chance of getting him back safely." Emily, who'd been listening with growing dread, finally spoke, her voice steadier than she felt. "I'll go." "Absolutely not," Damien repeated, turning to face her fully. "You just heard Marco say it's a trap." "I know it's a trap. I'm not stupid, Damien. But I also know that man raised me when nobody else would, gave up his own retirement to put food on my table, sat with me every single night for a year after my parents died, because he couldn't stand the thought of me being alone in that house." Her voice broke slightly, but she pushed forward. "I'm not letting him die because I was too afraid to walk into a room." "Then we go together," Damien said firmly. "But we go prepared, not walking blindly into whatever they've planned." "What does that mean?" Damien turned to Marco, his mind already working through tactical possibilities. "I want a full plan by morning. Surveillance, escape routes, contingencies if things go wrong. And I want answers about exactly what they think Emily knows, because if we're walking into this meeting, I want to understand precisely what we're negotiating against." The remainder of that night passed in tense planning, Damien's team working with the precision of men who'd survived countless dangerous negotiations, mapping every possible angle, every potential threat, every way the meeting could unfold. But underneath the tactical planning, Emily found herself increasingly aware of something else entirely, the way Damien's hand found hers during quiet moments, the way his eyes tracked her movement across the room, even while discussing security logistics, the way his voice softened whenever he spoke directly to her, despite the harsh, calculated tone he used with everyone else. "You don't have to do this," she told him quietly during a brief lull in the planning. "This isn't your fight. My grandfather, this whole situation, it's not your responsibility." "It became my responsibility the moment you almost died in my backyard," Damien said simply, not looking up from the map he was studying. "And it became something else entirely, somewhere in the past 2 weeks, something I'm still trying to understand myself." "What do you mean?" He finally looked up, his expression unguarded in a way she rarely saw. "I mean, I haven't slept properly since Christmas Eve. I mean, I've broken an engagement, dissolved a major business alliance, and I'm currently planning to walk into a potential ambush, all because some part of me decided somewhere along the way that protecting you matters more than protecting myself." The admission hung heavy between them, neither quite ready to name what it meant, both too aware of the danger waiting for them in less than 24 hours to fully process the weight of it. "Tomorrow night," Emily said finally, "we get him back. Then we figure out what this is." "Deal," Damien agreed, though something in his eyes suggested he already had a fairly clear idea of what this was, even if neither of them was ready to speak it aloud. The following evening arrived with brutal speed. By 6 o'clock, Damien's men had positioned themselves at strategic points around the perimeter of the Reyes property, hidden carefully enough to avoid detection, while maintaining the ability to respond instantly if negotiations turned violent. Marco rode in the lead car with Damien and Emily, his expression tight with focused concentration. "Remember," he said as they approached the property, "we have eyes everywhere. If anything goes wrong, we move immediately. Don't hesitate, don't try to be a hero." "I'm not trying to be anything except his granddaughter walking in to bring him home," Emily said, though her voice trembled slightly, despite her best efforts at composure. Damien reached over, squeezing her hand briefly. "We're getting him back, I promise you that." The property itself was unremarkable, a converted warehouse on the outskirts of the city, the kind of building that disappeared into the urban landscape without drawing any particular attention. 2 guards waited at the entrance, their expressions carefully blank as they patted down both Damien and Emily before allowing them inside. Reyes was waiting in what had clearly once been an office space, now stripped down to bare walls and a single table where he sat with deliberate casualness flanked by 2 more guards. "Mr. Moretti." Reyes's voice carried false warmth, the kind powerful men used when they believed themselves to be holding all the leverage. "And the famous Miss Carter, I've heard so much about you." "Where's my grandfather?" Emily's voice cut through any pretense of pleasantries, sharp with fear and fury combined. "He's safe. For now." Reyes gestured toward a closed door behind him. "Healthy, comfortable, well taken care of. Whether he stays that way depends entirely on how cooperative you decide to be tonight." "You wanted to negotiate," Damien said, his voice dangerously calm. "So negotiate. What exactly do you want?" "The file," Reyes said simply. "All copies. And your word, Moretti, that this entire conspiracy dies here tonight, never to be mentioned again to the Commission or anyone else. And in exchange, the old man goes home unharmed, and we forget this entire unfortunate misunderstanding ever happened." Reyes's smile didn't reach his eyes. A reasonable offer considering what's actually at stake. "What's actually at stake," Damien repeated slowly, "is evidence that you and your father conspired with Castellano and my own father to destroy an innocent family 20 years ago. Murder, theft of territory, and the systematic destruction of an entire bloodline to cover it up." Reyes's expression flickered, the casual confidence cracking slightly. "That's ancient history. It has nothing to do with the present." "Doesn't it?" Damien leaned forward. "Because from where I'm sitting, you're currently kidnapping an elderly man and threatening an innocent woman to protect that exact same ancient history. Seems pretty relevant to me." "Careful, Moretti." Reyes's voice hardened. "You're not the only one with leverage in this room." "Then use it," Damien challenged. "Because right now, all I see is a desperate man trying to bury a secret that's already starting to surface using kidnapping and intimidation because he has nothing else left." The tension in the room stretched unbearably tight, both men refusing to back down, neither willing to show the first sign of weakness. It was Emily who finally broke the silence, her voice steadier than either man expected. "I want to see him, right now, before this conversation continues another minute." Reyes studied her for a long moment, something calculating behind his eyes, before finally gesturing toward one of his guards. "Bring the old man out. Let her see he's unharmed." The door opened and Emily's heart stopped completely as her grandfather was led into the room, visibly shaken, but apparently unharmed. His eyes finding hers immediately, with a mixture of relief and fierce protective anger. "Emily." His voice was hoarse, but strong. "Don't you dare give them anything because of me. Whatever they want, don't you—" "Quiet!" One of the guards snapped, shoving him roughly forward. "Don't touch him." Damien's voice cracked through the room like a whip, his entire body tensing with barely controlled violence. "Touch him again, and this negotiation ends very differently." The guard hesitated, glancing toward Reyes for direction. "Easy," Reyes said, holding up a placating hand toward his own man, though his eyes never left Damien's face. "We're all civilized people here. No need for unnecessary violence." "Then let him go," Emily said, stepping forward despite Damien's instinctive movement to stop her. "Let him go now and we'll discuss the file." "Emily," Damien's voice held warning, "I know what I'm doing." She didn't look back at him, her focus entirely on Reyes, on the calculating man who held her grandfather's life in his hands. "You want the file gone, fine. But you let him go first and you let him leave this building before we discuss anything else." Reyes studied her for a long moment, clearly recalibrating his assessment of the quiet maid, who'd somehow ended up at the center of his carefully constructed plan. You're braver than I expected. You're more desperate than you're letting on, Emily countered, surprising herself with the steadiness in her own voice. If you were really confident in your position, you wouldn't need to kidnap an old man to force this conversation. Something shifted in Reyes's expression, not quite respect, but something adjacent to it. Fine. He goes free, but the file comes with him in exchange. No tricks, no copies hidden somewhere for insurance. That wasn't the deal, Damien interjected sharply. It's the only deal I'm offering, Reyes said firmly. Take it or leave it, Moretti, but understand this: if that file ever surfaces anywhere with the commission with rival families, anywhere at all, there won't be a third warning. We'll make sure neither of you survives long enough to regret it. The threat hung heavy in the room, absolute and chilling in its simplicity. Damien's jaw tightened, calculating risks, weighing options that had narrowed dramatically in the past several minutes. Emily watched him carefully, understanding the impossible position they'd been forced into: hand over evidence of a 20-year conspiracy or risk her grandfather's life in a standoff that could turn violent at any moment. Fine, Damien said finally, his voice tight with barely controlled fury. You get the file tonight. But understand this, Reyes, if anything happens to either of these people after we leave, if you go back on a single word of this agreement, I will burn your entire operation to the ground, and I won't lose a single night's sleep doing it. Understood. Reyes said, something almost satisfied flickering across his expression. The exchange happened quickly after that. Marco, who'd been waiting outside with a copy of the file, specifically prepared for this scenario, brought it inside under careful supervision. Reyes's men verified its authenticity, while Emily's grandfather was finally released, immediately pulled into a fierce embrace the moment he reached her side. I'm sorry, Emily whispered against his shoulder, tears finally breaking free now that the immediate danger had passed. I'm so sorry you got pulled into this. Don't apologize, he said firmly despite his exhaustion. You did nothing wrong. None of this is your fault. As they made their way back toward the cars, the night air cold and sharp after the tension inside Damien's expression remained grim, calculating clearly already 3 steps ahead in his thinking. That's not over, he said quietly once they were safely inside the vehicle driving away from the warehouse. Reyes thinks he just secured the only copy of that evidence. He's wrong. Emily turned sharply. What do you mean Marco gave him the file? Marco gave him a copy. Damien corrected, a hint of grim satisfaction entering his voice for the first time that night. I made 3 copies the moment we found it. 1 went into a secure deposit box only I have access to. 1 is currently sitting with my lawyer, sealed with instructions to release it to the commission if anything happens to either of us. And the 3rd copy is the one Reyes just received. You planned this from the start. I told you, Damien said, glancing back at her with something that looked almost like pride. I don't walk into negotiations without contingencies. Reyes thinks he's secured his safety tonight. In reality, he's just confirmed exactly how desperate he is, and confirmed every single detail in that file is accurate enough to terrify him into kidnapping and threats. So what happens now? Now, Damien said, his expression hardening with renewed purpose. We present everything to the commission, carefully, methodically, with enough corroborating evidence that nobody can claim it's fabricated. And we let the consequences fall exactly where they should. Emily's grandfather, still recovering from the night's terror, looked between them both with growing understanding. This is bigger than I realized, isn't it? This isn't just about some old housekeeper stealing money. It's about justice that's been delayed 20 years, Damien said quietly, and about making sure nobody ever uses fear and intimidation to silence the truth again. As the car continued through the dark streets toward home, Emily found herself studying Damien's profile in the dim light, understanding settling over her with renewed clarity. This man, ruthless, calculating, capable of planning 3 steps ahead, even in the middle of a hostage negotiation, had also sat beside her hospital bed for 3 sleepless nights, had broken his own engagement without hesitation. The moment her safety was threatened, had just orchestrated an elaborate deception, specifically to protect both her and the truth. Thank you, she said quietly, for tonight, for everything. Damien glanced over, something soft passing behind the calculation still visible in his eyes. Don't thank me yet. The hardest part is still ahead of us. Back at the estate, Emily's grandfather was settled into one of the guest rooms, despite his protests that he was perfectly capable of going home, Damien insisting firmly that nobody connected to this conspiracy would be left unprotected while threats still lingered. "You're stubborn," the old man told Damien, though grudging respect had crept into his voice. "Most men your position wouldn't bother themselves with an old man's safety." "Most men in my position wouldn't have a reason to," Damien said, simply glancing toward Emily, who was helping settle blankets despite her own exhaustion. The old man's eyes followed the glance, something knowing crossing his weathered face. "I see. It's not—" Emily started flushing slightly. "I didn't say anything," her grandfather said, though his small smile suggested he understood perfectly well what he'd just witnessed. Later that night, after her grandfather had finally fallen into exhausted sleep, Emily found Damien in his study, staring at the 3 copies of the file spread across his desk, his expression heavy with the weight of decision still ahead. "You should sleep," she said quietly, leaning against the doorframe. "So should you." "I can't. Every time I close my eyes, I see Reyes's guards shoving him forward." She crossed the room slowly, sitting in the chair across from his desk. "Do you think this is really over the danger? I mean—" "No," Damien admitted honestly. "Reyes and Castellano are cornered animals right now. Cornered animals are the most dangerous kind. They'll regroup, they'll plan something else, and we need to move on the commission before they do." "When?" "Tomorrow," Damien said firmly. "I've already arranged a meeting with 3 senior commission members, people my father trusted, people who still respect what's left of his legacy, even knowing what he did." "Will they believe it?" "They'll believe documentation this thorough," Damien said. "Financial records, the photographs, sworn testimony from Dunbar about the current conspiracy connecting back to it. It's not just one piece of evidence anymore, Emily. It's an entire chain, and chains like that don't break easily." Emily studied him for a long moment, something tender crossing her exhausted features. "You could have just buried this. Kept the territory your father stole, kept the alliances, kept everything exactly as it was. Instead, you're risking everything to expose a conspiracy that benefits your own family." "My family benefited from a lie," Damien said quietly. "From a friend's destruction. I won't carry that forward, not when I finally understand what it actually cost, not just the Bianchi family, but apparently you 20 years later, nearly losing your life over secrets you never asked to know." The room fell quiet between them, the weight of everything they'd survived together, settling into something neither had quite named yet, but both clearly felt. "Whatever happens tomorrow," Emily said softly, "thank you for choosing truth over comfort." Damien reached across the desk, his hand finding hers. "Whatever happens tomorrow, we face it together." Outside, the city lights blurred past in streaks of gold and white beyond his study windows, the warehouse and its threats fading into memory. But the weight of what was coming confronting the commission, exposing 20 years of buried conspiracy facing whatever retaliation Reyes and Castellano might still attempt, settled heavily over both of them, each silently understanding that tonight's victory had only bought them time, not safety, and that the true reckoning was still waiting just beyond the horizon. Morning arrived with a gray, bruised sky, and Emily woke to find Damien already gone from the house, his side of the breakfast table cold by the time she made it downstairs. "He left 2 hours ago," Marco told her, looking like he hadn't slept much better than she had. "Commission meeting. He wanted you to stay here with your grandfather where it's safe." "Safe." Emily repeated the word like it tasted strange. Marco nowhere has felt safe since Christmas Eve. "Fair point." He almost smiled, then didn't. "He's good at this, Emily. Negotiating with dangerous men. It's literally what he was raised to do." "That's not what worries me." "Then what does—" Emily wrapped her hands around a coffee cup she had no intention of drinking. "Reyes told him there wouldn't be a third warning. What if walking into that commission meeting with evidence is exactly the kind of move that gets the first one used?" Marco didn't have an answer for that, and his silence said more than reassurance ever could have. The meeting took place in a private dining room above an unremarkable restaurant in the city, the kind of place that existed specifically for conversations nobody wanted overheard. 3 men sat across the table from Damien Salvatore Greco, the oldest and most respected member of the commission, flanked by 2 others, whose names carried similar weight in rooms like this one. You said this was urgent. Greco said, his voice carrying the gravel of 70 years and 4 decades inside the business. I assume it's worth my time. It's worth considerably more than your time, Damien said, sliding the folder across the table. It's evidence that 20 years ago, my father conspired with Castellano and Reyes to destroy the Bianchi family using fabricated charges in order to seize their shipping territory. The temperature in the room dropped instantly. Greco opened the folder slowly, his expression unreadable as he reviewed each document, each financial record, the photograph last of all, studying it for a long, heavy moment before setting it down. You understand what you're handing me, he said finally. This isn't a minor accusation, Damien. This implicates your own father, posthumously, but implicates him completely. I understand exactly what I'm handing you. Why? Greco's eyes narrowed, searching Damien's face for the angle, the strategy, the thing powerful men always assumed was hiding beneath any apparent act of conscience. What do you gain from exposing your own family's sins? Nothing, Damien said honestly. I gain nothing. I lose alliances, possibly territory, definitely reputation. But Castellano and Reyes have spent the past 2 weeks kidnapping an innocent man and threatening a woman who never asked to be part of any of this, all to keep this buried. That's not ancient history protecting itself. That's an active, ongoing conspiracy, and I won't let it continue under my watch. One of the other commission members, a sharp-eyed woman named Costas, who'd inherited her position from a father who'd died protecting it, leaned forward. The woman you mentioned, the maid from the Christmas banquet. There are already rumors circulating about her. Emily Carter, Damien confirmed. She accidentally discovered this file months ago while organizing storage. Castellano and Reyes believe she might remember details dangerous enough to expose them. That belief is the only reason any of this came to light at all. So they tried to eliminate a witness, Costas said slowly, and instead created one. Essentially, yes. Greco closed the folder, his expression grave. This will not be a quiet process, Damien. If this commission acts on this evidence, it will not be subtle. Castellano and Reyes will lose everything: territory, alliances, possibly their freedom, depending on what charges follow. Families that powerful do not go quietly. I'm aware. They may come for you directly, for the girl, for anyone connected to this. Greco's eyes held real warning, not threat, but genuine concern from a man who'd survived this business for decades by understanding exactly how dangerous cornered men became. Are you prepared for that? Damien thought of Emily standing in that warehouse, steadier than she had any right to be, negotiating her grandfather's freedom with a calm that had genuinely surprised him. I've been prepared for worse, he said quietly. What I'm not prepared to do is let fear keep something like this buried for another 20 years. The commission deliberated for nearly 2 hours, while Damien waited in an adjoining room, his phone buzzing periodically with updates from Marco. Nothing urgent, just routine check-ins meant to confirm Emily and her grandfather remained safe. Each buzz still sent a spike of adrenaline through him before he confirmed the message wasn't bad news. When Greco finally emerged, his expression had hardened into something resolute. The commission accepts the evidence as credible, he announced. Castellano and Reyes will be summoned to answer for it within the week. Given the severity, fabricated evidence resulting in a family's destruction, followed by recent kidnapping and intimidation, to suppress that evidence, I expect both families will lose their territory entirely, possibly more depending on additional charges that may surface during investigation. Relief washed through Damien, quickly tempered by Greco's next words. Understand something, though. Cornered men with nothing left to lose are the most dangerous variety that exists. The week between now and the formal hearing, that's when you need to be most careful. Reyes and Castellano will know this is coming. They'll know exactly who exposed them. I understand. Protect the girl, Greco added, surprising Damien with the directness of the warning. Protect her closely. Men like Reyes don't simply accept defeat. Sometimes they try to take something valuable down with them on the way out. The drive back to the estate felt longer than it should have, Damien's mind cycling through every possible retaliation. Reyes and Castellano might attempt every vulnerability in his security, every way Emily could still be hurt, despite everything they'd already survived together. He found her in the kitchen when he finally arrived home, helping her grandfather prepare what looked like an attempt at normal life soup. simmering on the stove, bread cooling on the counter, the old man directing operations from a chair while Emily followed his instructions with focused concentration. "How did it go?" she asked, immediately abandoning the spoon she'd been stirring with. "The commission accepted the evidence. Castellano and Reyes will be summoned within the week." Relief flooded her expression quickly, followed by wariness. But Greco warned me that cornered men are dangerous, that the week before the hearing is when we need to be most careful. Damien crossed the kitchen, his hands finding her shoulders. "I need you and your grandfather to stay here inside the estate with security around you constantly, no exceptions." "For how long?" "Until this is completely resolved." Emily's grandfather, listening from his chair, spoke up with quiet authority. "She's not built for cages, son. I raised her myself. She'll go stir-crazy locked inside walls for a week, no matter how nice the walls are." "It's not about comfort," Damien said firmly. "It's about safety." "I understand that," Emily said, surprising him with her agreement. "I'm not arguing. I just want you to understand what you're asking, because the last time someone tried to keep me locked away and protected, it ended with me freezing half to death in a snowstorm." The reminder landed heavily, and Damien's jaw tightened with the memory. "This is different." "I know it's different. I trust you completely." She reached up, covering his hand with hers, where it still rested on her shoulder. "I'm just saying, don't disappear into protecting me so completely that you forget I'm capable of protecting myself too." Something in her words settled into him, recognition of a partnership rather than simple guardianship, and Damien found himself nodding slowly. "Okay," he said. "We figure this out together, but you don't leave this estate without me or Marco. Promise me that much." "I promise." The next 4 days passed in a strange, tense calm, the household functioning almost normally on the surface, while Damien's security tightened invisibly around the edges. Additional men positioned at every entrance, surveillance increased on every road leading toward the estate. Emily used the time to grow closer to the staff, who remained helping reorganize the household routines that had been thrown into chaos by Dunbar's departure, training a new housekeeper with patience that surprised everyone who'd only known her as the quiet maid who stayed invisible. "You're good at this," Damien observed one evening, watching her patiently explain inventory systems to the nervous new hire. "Leading people, I mean. You'd never guess you spent 11 months trying not to be noticed." "I learned by watching," Emily said simply. "Watching what worked, what didn't, what made people feel respected instead of disposable." She glanced toward him, something thoughtful crossing her face. "Your father built this house on fear. You're rebuilding it on something else." "Am I?" "You are, even if you haven't fully realized it yet." The compliment, simple as it was, struck something deep in Damien, a man who'd spent his entire adult life believing fear was the only currency powerful enough to hold an empire together. It was on the 5th night, with the commission hearing scheduled for the following morning, that everything nearly collapsed entirely. Emily had gone to check on her grandfather, who'd insisted on a short walk through the estate's enclosed garden, despite the cold, claiming he needed fresh air after days of confinement. Damien had reluctantly agreed, with 2 guards positioned at careful distance, the garden itself enclosed by walls high enough to prevent any obvious threat. What none of them anticipated was the threat already inside. One of the newer security hires, a man named Tony, brought on just 2 months earlier with references that had checked out perfectly, had been quietly compromised weeks before Christmas payment from Castellano, sitting untouched in an account specifically designed to avoid suspicion until the moment it mattered. That moment arrived as Emily and her grandfather walked the garden path, the old man pointing out winter roses still somehow blooming despite the cold, Emily laughing at his determination to find beauty in every season. "Emily," Tony's voice cut through the quiet garden, his usual easy manner replaced by something tight and urgent. "Mr. Moretti needs you now. It's about the hearing tomorrow." Now it's nearly midnight. He said it's urgent. Something about additional evidence Reyes's people might try to introduce. Tony's expression remained convincingly concerned. "He's waiting in the East Wing study." Emily glanced at her grandfather, who waved her forward. "Go. I'll head back inside myself. I'm not made of glass." It wasn't until Emily had followed Tony through a service corridor, one rarely used, leading away from the main house toward the old carriage house, that the wrongness of the situation finally registered. This isn't the way to the East Wing. Shortcut. Tony said, his voice suddenly different, harder. Emily's instincts, sharpened by everything she'd survived in the past 2 weeks, screamed warning seconds before Tony's hand closed around her arm with bruising force. "Don't scream," he said quietly. A gun appearing in his other hand pressed discreetly against her side, where the darkness would hide it from any casual observer. "Walk." "Tony, what are you—" "Walk," he repeated, and the desperate edge in his voice told her everything she needed to know about how trapped, how committed, how dangerous his position had become. Outside near the old carriage house, a car waited with its engine already running, exhaust curling into the cold night air. Emily's mind raced through every possibility, every escape, even as Tony forced her forward with the gun's pressure, never relenting. "Reyes is paying you," she said, forcing steadiness into her voice, despite the terror clawing through her chest. "This is what Greco warned about. The desperate move before the hearing." "Reyes is paying me enough to disappear forever," Tony confirmed grimly. "And once you're gone, once you're no longer around to testify about what you remember, this entire case falls apart. No witness, no corroboration beyond paper documents that can be challenged in court. Damien will know it was you. He'll find you wherever you go. Maybe," Tony said, though something in his voice suggested even he understood the gamble he was making, the desperation driving a decision that would likely end his life one way or another, regardless of how tonight unfolded. "But by then, Reyes will have already won, and I'll have enough money to disappear somewhere he can't find me either." They'd nearly reached the waiting car when a shadow detached itself from the darkness beside the carriage house. Marco, who'd been doing his nightly perimeter check, freezing the moment he registered what he was seeing. "Tony," Marco's voice carried careful, controlled warning. "Whatever this is, stop right now. Stay back." Tony warned, the gun pressing harder against Emily's ribs. "I'll use this, Marco. I swear to God I will." "You shoot her, you lose your only leverage." Marco said, his own hand moving slowly toward his weapon while maintaining careful eye contact, trying to diffuse rather than escalate. "Think this through. You're not a killer, Tony. I've worked with you for 2 months. This isn't who you are. It's who I have to be tonight." Emily's heart hammered against her ribs, every instinct screaming to fight, to scream, to do something other than stand frozen in the grip of a desperate man with a gun pressed against her side. But years of staying invisible, of swallowing fear of surviving by remaining still, had taught her something Tony clearly hadn't anticipated. She knew exactly how to disappear into stillness while waiting for the right moment. As Marco continued talking, his voice low and steady, clearly stalling for time, while signaling silently to the additional guards, Emily could now see emerging from the darkness at the edges of her vision. She let her body go deliberately limp, a slight stumble that pulled Tony's attention downward for just a fraction of a second. It was enough. She drove her elbow backward with every ounce of strength she possessed, connecting solidly with Tony's ribs, his grip loosening just enough for her to twist free and drop to the ground exactly as Marco's training kicked in, completely. His weapon already raised, his voice sharp with command. "Drop it now." The chaos that followed happened in seconds that felt like hours. Tony's gun swinging wildly, a shot fired into the darkness that missed everyone by inches. Additional guards converging from every direction, and then Tony himself crumpling as Marco's well-placed shot caught him in the shoulder, the gun clattering uselessly to the frozen ground. Emily scrambled backward, her entire body shaking, adrenaline and terror crashing through her system as Marco rushed forward to secure Tony's weapon and call for immediate medical attention. "Emily!" Damien's voice tore through the night, raw with terror she'd never heard from him before. He'd been alerted the moment Marco's emergency signal went out, sprinting from the main house with a speed that defied his usual careful, controlled movements. He reached her in seconds, pulling her against his chest with desperate force, his hands shaking as they checked her over for injuries, despite her repeated assurances that she was unhurt. "I'm fine," she said, though her voice shook nearly as badly as her hands. "Damien, I'm fine. He didn't hurt me." "He had a gun on you." Damien's voice broke completely, all his careful control finally shattering. "He almost took you away from me, and I wasn't there. I was supposed to protect you, and I wasn't even there. You couldn't have known." Emily said firmly, pulling back enough to meet his eyes to make him truly see her whole and unharmed, despite everything. Nobody could have known Tony was compromised. This isn't your failure. It feels like my failure. His hands cupped her face, desperate need to confirm she was real unhurt, still standing in front of him. I told you I'd keep you safe. I told you nothing would happen to you again. And you did keep me safe, Emily said softly. Marco was here. Your training, your security, your instincts about protecting this house properly, all of it worked exactly the way it was supposed to. I'm standing here because of everything you built, Damien, not despite it. Behind them, paramedics worked to stabilize Tony, who'd already begun talking rapidly, desperately clearly, understanding that cooperation now represented his only chance at leniency, given everything that had just unfolded. He'll testify. Marco reported approaching once Tony had been loaded into an ambulance under heavy guard. Says Reyes approached him 3 weeks ago before Christmas even happened. Apparently they suspected Emily might be dangerous to their interests, even before the banquet incident. Before Christmas, Damien repeated slowly, the implication settling into place with sickening clarity. That means Vanessa's accusation wasn't the beginning of this conspiracy. It was already in motion. Looks that way, Marco confirmed grimly. Reyes was already planning to eliminate Emily as a potential witness. Vanessa's jealousy just gave them a convenient opportunity to escalate faster than originally planned. Emily felt something cold settle in her stomach, understanding the full scope of how long she'd been a target without ever knowing it, how close she'd come to losing everything before she'd even understood there was a conspiracy to escape. This changes the hearing tomorrow. Damien said, his mind already shifting into strategic calculation despite the adrenaline still coursing through his system. Attempted kidnapping the night before testimony ordered by Reyes specifically. That's not just supporting evidence anymore. That's a direct, undeniable confession of guilt. Greco will want to move the hearing up, Marco agreed. Tonight if possible, before Reyes has time to attempt anything else. Within hours, the commission had reconvened in an emergency session. Tony's recorded testimony given from his hospital bed, weak but coherent, providing the final, undeniable piece of evidence needed to seal both Reyes and Castellano's fate completely. By dawn, word had spread through the entire criminal underworld of the East Coast that both families had been formally stripped of their territories, their alliances dissolved, their reputations destroyed, beyond any possibility of recovery. Reyes himself had been taken into custody before sunrise, Castellano following shortly after, both facing charges that would likely keep them imprisoned for the remainder of their lives. Vanessa, it emerged during the subsequent investigation, had known considerably more about her father's conspiracy than she'd ever admitted her jealousy over Damien's attention toward Emily, providing the perfect cover for a plot already months in motion. Stripped of her family's protection, abandoned by allies who no longer saw value in associating with a name now synonymous with fabricated conspiracy and attempted murder, she disappeared from the social circles she'd once dominated entirely. Emily learned of her fate secondhand weeks later, feeling something complicated that wasn't quite satisfaction and wasn't quite pity, but existed somewhere uncomfortably between the two. "Do you regret any of it?" she asked Damien one quiet morning, weeks after the chaos had finally settled into something resembling peace. "Breaking the engagement, dissolving the alliance, exposing your own father's crimes." Damien considered the question seriously, the way he considered everything important to him now. "I regret that it took someone almost dying for me to understand what actually mattered," he said finally. "I regret 16 years of never asking Dunbar how her family was doing. I regret every moment I spent believing fear was the only thing capable of holding an empire together." He reached for her hand, threading his fingers through hers with quiet certainty. "But I don't regret any of the choices that led me here to this moment with you." Emily's grandfather, recovering well from his ordeal, had taken to spending most afternoons in the estate's library, claiming he'd never had access to so many books in his entire life and intended to make full use of the opportunity before anyone changed their mind about his extended stay. "You know," he told Damien one afternoon, catching him alone in the hallway, "I was prepared to hate you. Mafia boss, dangerous reputation, my granddaughter working in your house for less money than she deserved while you lived in luxury upstairs. And now, Now I've watched you risk everything, your empire, your reputation, your own safety to protect her and expose a truth that could have stayed buried forever without consequence to you personally." The old man's eyes were sharp, despite his age, missing nothing. "That's not the kind of man I expected to find in this house." "What kind of man did you expect?" "Someone like Reyes," her grandfather said simply. "Someone willing to sacrifice anyone and anything to protect his own interests. Instead, I found someone willing to sacrifice everything to protect what's right." He paused, studying Damien carefully. "She loves you, you know. I've watched her face every time your name comes up. I raised that girl from heartbreak, watched her build walls so high nobody could reach her after losing her parents. You're the first person who's gotten through those walls in years." The admission settled into Damien with quiet, profound weight confirmation of something he'd suspected, but hadn't dared fully name even to himself. "I love her too," he said simply, the words feeling both terrifying and completely natural leaving his mouth for the first time. "I think I have since long before I understood what that meant." "Then stop wasting time," the old man said gruffly, though warmth softened his weathered features. "I'm not getting any younger, and I'd like to see her happy while I'm still around to witness it." That evening, as snow began falling again outside the estate's windows, gentler this time, peaceful rather than violent. Nothing like the storm that had nearly taken everything from them. Weeks earlier, Damien found Emily in the same library window seat where he'd first told her about Dunbar's betrayal, the same quiet space where so much of their story together had unfolded. "It's strange," she said, watching the snow drift past the glass. "A month ago, I was invisible in this house. Now I can't walk through a room without feeling like everything's different, like I belong somewhere I never expected to belong." "You were never invisible," Damien said quietly, settling beside her. "I saw you from the very beginning. I just didn't understand yet what that seeing meant." Emily turned to face him fully, something vulnerable and hopeful crossing her expression. "What does it mean now?" Damien reached into his pocket, retrieving something small that caught the lamplight as he opened his palm. Not an engagement ring, not yet, but something simpler, more personal. A small silver locket that had belonged to his mother, the only piece of jewelry he'd kept from a childhood, otherwise defined by his father's harsh, fear-driven legacy. "It means I'm not interested in building an empire on fear anymore," he said softly, placing the locket carefully into her hands. "I'm interested in building something with you instead. Something based on the kind of strength you've shown me, quiet, persistent, unshakable, even when everything around you is falling apart." Emily's fingers closed around the locket, tears gathering in her eyes as she looked up at him, understanding settling over her with overwhelming clarity. "I'd like that," she whispered. "More than anything." Outside, the snow continued falling steadily, blanketing the estate in peaceful white. Nothing like the violent storm that had brought them together weeks earlier, but somehow impossibly exactly the kind of beginning neither of them had ever expected to find. The locket stayed warm in Emily's palm long after Damien had gone to handle calls that still came at every hour, the business of dismantling two criminal empires, apparently requiring constant attention even weeks after the commission's ruling. She didn't take it off. Not once. Not even when Mrs. Hensley, the new housekeeper she'd personally trained, raised an eyebrow at it during morning rounds. "That's a serious piece of jewelry for a woman who used to wear the same uniform every single day," Hensley observed not unkindly. "It's not about the jewelry," Emily said, tucking it beneath her collar with a small smile she couldn't quite suppress. "It's about who gave it to me." But peace, Emily had learned over the past month, rarely lasted as long as anyone wanted. 3 weeks after the commission's ruling, just as the household had finally begun settling into something resembling normal rhythm, Marco arrived at breakfast with an expression that immediately killed whatever lightness had existed in the room. "Boss, we have a situation." Damien set down his coffee slowly. "What kind of situation?" "Vanessa." Marco's jaw tightened. "She's back, and she's not alone." Emily's stomach dropped. "Back where?" "Outside the front gate right now, demanding to speak with Damien directly." Marco hesitated. "She's got 2 men with her. I don't recognize them, which worries me more than if I did." Damien was already standing his chair, scraping back hard enough to startle the staff still clearing breakfast plates. "Lock down the perimeter. Nobody comes through that gate without my direct authorization." "Already done. She's not getting inside. But Damien—" Marco's voice dropped lower. "She's saying she has information. Something about Reyes's associates who weren't caught in the initial sweep. Says if you don't talk to her, those associates are going to come after Emily, directly finish what Tony started." The threat, even secondhand, sent ice through Emily's veins. "It could be a trap," she said immediately. "Get you outside the gate, vulnerable, distracted." "I know." Damien's expression had gone hard, calculating in the way she'd learned meant he was already 3 steps ahead, weighing every possibility. "But I also know Vanessa well enough to know she doesn't bluff about things that could expose her further. If she's risking showing her face after everything that's happened, there's a reason." "Then I'm coming with you." "Absolutely not. Damien." Emily's voice carried a steadiness that had only grown stronger over the past month, no longer the trembling uncertainty of the maid who'd once flinched at raised voices. "If this is about associates coming after me, then I have every right to hear what she has to say. Hiding inside this house didn't protect me from Tony. It's not going to protect me now." Damien studied her for a long moment, something fierce and proud flickering behind the worry in his eyes. "Fine, but you stay behind me, completely behind me, no exceptions." They met Vanessa at the gate itself. Damien's security positioned at careful intervals, weapons concealed but ready. Vanessa looked different than Emily remembered, thinner, harder, the polished confidence that had once defined her, replaced by something brittle and desperate. "You actually came—" Vanessa said something almost like relief crossing her face before she caught herself restoring the cool mask Emily recognized from the banquet. "Talk," Damien said flatly. "You have 5 minutes before I have my men escort you off this property permanently." "There's a man named Salazar," Vanessa said quickly, the urgency in her voice suggesting genuine fear rather than manipulation. "He worked with my father for years off the books, the kind of man who never appears on any official records. When my father lost everything, when the commission stripped him of territory, Salazar lost his entire income too. He's furious. He blames Emily specifically for everything that happened." "Why come to me with this?" Damien's voice remained suspicious. "You hate her. You tried to have her killed in a blizzard." Something flickered across Vanessa's face, shame maybe, or the closest thing to it she was capable of feeling. "Because I'm not my father, even if I helped him without fully understanding what I was helping with. And because Salazar doesn't just want revenge on Emily, he's planning something at your charity gala next week. Something that could hurt a lot of innocent people, not just the 2 of you." Emily's breath caught. The gala, a fundraiser she'd spent weeks organizing, the first major event for the foundation Damien had established, using a portion of his father's ill-gotten wealth redirected toward families struggling with the kind of debt that had once trapped Emily's own father. "What kind of something?" Damien demanded. "I don't know specifics. I only know he's been gathering men, gathering resources, and he mentioned the gala specifically in a conversation I overheard 2 days ago." Vanessa's composure finally cracked slightly. "I know you don't trust me. I know I don't deserve trust after everything I did. But I couldn't let something happen to dozens of innocent people because I stayed silent." Damien studied her for a long, tense moment, weighing genuine warning against elaborate manipulation. "Why should I believe any of this?" "Because if I wanted you dead, I could have stayed silent and let Salazar's plan unfold without warning," Vanessa said simply. "I'm not asking for forgiveness, Damien. I'm asking you to protect people who don't deserve to suffer for my father's sins or mine." After Vanessa left, escorted firmly off the property by Marco's men, Damien turned to Emily, his expression grim with new calculation. "We could cancel the gala," he said. "Postpone everything until we've confirmed or disproven this threat." "No." Emily's response came immediately fierce. "That foundation matters too much. Those families counting on support next week, I won't let fear cancel something that important, not after everything we've already survived to get here." "Emily, if Salazar is planning something violent, then we prepare for it," she said firmly, echoing words Damien himself had spoken weeks earlier in this exact tone. We don't run from threats anymore, Damien. We face them carefully, with everything we've learned. Isn't that exactly what you taught me? Something in Damien's expression softened with reluctant pride, even as worry remained etched across his features. You're terrifyingly stubborn, you know that. I learned from the best. The week leading up to the gala passed in intensive preparation, Damien's security team working alongside city contacts to investigate Salazar's background, his known associates, any pattern that might reveal exactly what he was planning. Marco's investigation revealed a man with a long history of violence, someone who'd operated in Reyes's shadow for over a decade, someone whose desperation following his sudden loss of income made him exactly the kind of unpredictable threat Greco had warned about weeks earlier. He's not subtle, Marco reported 3 days before the gala. We tracked a recent purchase explosive, small quantity, enough to cause significant damage in an enclosed space, but not enough to level a building entirely. He's planning something targeted, not indiscriminate. Targeted at what specifically? Our best guess is the main stage where you'll be speaking. He wants maximum visibility, maximum humiliation, probably timed for when the most witnesses and press are present. Emily felt the familiar tightening of fear in her chest, but underneath it, something steadier had taken root over the past month. Not fearlessness exactly, but the understanding that fear no longer had to mean paralysis. Then we changed the plan, she said. Not cancel, change. The gala itself arrived with deceptive calm, 300 guests filling the grand ballroom that had once hosted the Christmas banquet, where everything began, now transformed entirely. Warm lighting, joyful music, photographs of families. The foundation had already helped displayed prominently throughout the room. What the guests didn't see was the additional security woven invisibly throughout the event. The bomb-sniffing dogs that had swept every inch of the building hours before. Doors opened, the careful substitution that moved the actual speaking location away from the obvious main stage to a smaller, more secure platform. At the last possible moment, the surveillance team monitoring every entrance with focused intensity. Salazar. Emily learned later had been positioned outside waiting for confirmation. His device had been properly placed by an associate who'd infiltrated the setup crew days earlier. What he hadn't anticipated was Damien's security identifying that associate through facial recognition pulled from previous surveillance, intercepting him hours before the event even began, the device he carried never making it anywhere near the ballroom at all. The arrest happened quietly, efficiently, away from any guest's awareness, Salazar himself taken into custody outside the building, moments after his associate's failure became apparent, his desperate attempt at revenge collapsing before it ever had the chance to harm a single person. Emily learned of the successful intervention just minutes before she was scheduled to speak, Damien appearing at her side backstage, with visible relief replacing the tension that had defined his expression all evening. "It's done," he said simply. "Salazar is in custody. Nobody was hurt." The relief that flooded through her was almost overwhelming, her knees momentarily unsteady with the release of tension she hadn't fully acknowledged carrying. "It's really over," she whispered. "All of it. Reyes, Castellanos, Salazar, the entire conspiracy that started with a blizzard." "It's really over," Damien confirmed, pulling her gently into his arms. "You did this, Emily. Your courage, your refusal to let fear control your choices, that's what got us here." "We did this," she corrected. "Together." When Emily walked onto that small, secure platform, minutes later facing 300 guests who had no idea how close disaster had come to touching their evening, her voice carried steady and clear, untouched by the fear that had nearly defined her entire existence just 2 months earlier. "A year ago, I was a maid in this very house." She began watching surprise ripple through the crowd, who recognized her now, who'd heard whispers of the scandal, but never the full truth. "I worked invisible, exhausted, carrying debt that wasn't mine to carry, believing my entire worth was measured by how quietly I could disappear into a room." She paused, finding Damien's eyes in the crowd, drawing strength from his steady, unwavering presence. "This Christmas Eve I nearly died in a blizzard because someone believed people like me don't matter enough to protect. But I survived. And in surviving, I discovered something I never expected, that true strength isn't about wealth or power or fear. It's about choosing again and again to do what's right even when it costs you everything. Applause began rippling through the crowd, but Emily continued, her voice gathering even more conviction. This foundation exists because one man decided fear shouldn't be the only currency that built an empire, because he understood that protecting vulnerable people matters more than protecting alliances built on cruelty. Every family we help tonight, every debt we forgive, every life we change, that's not charity. That's justice finally catching up to people who've been invisible for far too long. The applause swelled into a standing ovation, 300 guests rising together, moved by words that carried the unmistakable weight of someone who'd lived every syllable of what she described. Damien watched from the side of the platform, pride and love radiating so clearly across his features that several guests near him exchanged knowing smiles, understanding exactly what they were witnessing even before any formal announcement had been made. Months passed following the gala's success, the foundation expanding rapidly as word spread about families helped, debts forgiven, lives genuinely transformed by resources redirected from decades of accumulated criminal wealth towards something finally worth that wealth's existence. Emily oversaw operations with the same quiet dedication she'd once brought to scrubbing floors, except now her exhaustion came from purpose rather than survival. Her late nights filled with case files of families needing help rather than silver trays needing polish. "You've changed this house completely," her grandfather observed one evening watching her work from his favorite chair in the library, his health steadily improving with proper care and the absence of constant stress. "I barely recognize it from that first Christmas I worried about you working here." "It's not the house that changed," Emily said, glancing toward the doorway where Damien had just appeared, exhaustion from a long day of business meetings written across his features, but softening immediately at the sight of her. "It's everything inside it." "Speaking of changes," her grandfather said something knowing, entering his weathered voice as he watched Damien approach. "I assume there's a reason you've been wearing that locket every single day for the past 6 months without ever explaining what it actually means." Emily flushed slightly, her hand instinctively moving to touch the silver pendant beneath her collar. Damien crossed the room slowly, his expression carrying a mixture of nervousness Emily had rarely witnessed from a man typically defined by absolute control. "Actually," he said, his voice carrying unusual hesitation, "I was hoping to discuss exactly that." He knelt then, right there in the library where so much of their story had unfolded, where they'd discovered the file that started everything, where he'd given her his mother's locket, weeks after a blizzard nearly took her life, where countless quiet conversations had slowly rebuilt both their understanding of what truly mattered. "Emily Carter," he said, his voice steady, despite the visible emotion underlying every word. "You walked into my life as someone everyone else considered invisible. You taught me that strength isn't measured by fear, that true leadership means protecting the vulnerable rather than exploiting them, and that the family I choose matters infinitely more than the empire I inherited." Tears gathered in Emily's eyes, her hands trembling as understanding crystallized completely. "I don't want to build anything else in this world without you beside me," Damien continued, producing a ring that caught the lamplight, exactly as the locket had months earlier. "Will you marry me?" The answer came without hesitation, without doubt, without any trace of the fear that had once defined every choice Emily made in this house. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, stronger, certain. "Yes, completely, absolutely yes." Her grandfather's applause from his chair provided the only witness either of them needed, though news would spread quickly enough through the household, through the city, through the criminal underworld, still adjusting to understanding exactly what kind of man now controlled the Moretti empire. Their wedding, held the following Christmas Eve, exactly 1 year after that fateful blizzard, transformed the same mansion that had once witnessed Emily's near death into a celebration of everything that had grown from that darkest night. The household staff who attended did so not as servants required to work the event, but as honored guests, each one personally invited by Emily herself, each one treated with the dignity and respect that had become the foundation's defining principle. Mrs. Hensley cried through the entire ceremony. Marco served as best man, his usual stoic composure cracking slightly during his toast, as he recounted the night he'd nearly lost both his closest friend and the woman who'd somehow become essential to that friend's survival. Even Dunbar attended her grandson's medical bills, long since covered her betrayal, long since forgiven through actions rather than empty words, sitting quietly in the back, with tears streaming freely down her weathered face. As Damien and Emily exchanged vows beneath the same chandeliers that had witnessed her near death exactly 1 year earlier, snow began falling gently outside the windows. Peaceful, beautiful. Nothing like the violent storm that had once threatened to take everything from both of them. A year ago, Damien said during his vows, his voice carrying raw emotion he no longer bothered hiding, "I found you freezing in the snow, invisible to everyone except me. I spent that entire year learning that the strongest person in any room isn't the one everyone fears. It's the one who chooses kindness, even when kindness costs everything." Emily, tears streaming freely down her own face, found her voice steady despite the emotion overwhelming her. "A year ago, I believed my entire worth was measured by how quietly I could disappear. You taught me that the people who truly matter are the ones who notice you, even when you're trying hardest to remain invisible. You saw me when nobody else did, and you never stopped seeing me since." As they sealed their vows with a kiss that drew thunderous applause from gathered guests, Emily caught her grandfather's eye across the room, his weathered face glowing with a happiness she'd rarely witnessed since her parents' deaths years earlier. This was the family she'd never expected to find. This was the love that had grown from the darkest night of her life. This was proof undeniable and complete that true strength had never been about wealth or power or fear at all. It had always been about choosing again and again to protect the people who mattered most, and refusing, no matter the cost, to let anyone convince you that kindness made you weak. That Christmas Eve, exactly 1 year after a blizzard nearly destroyed everything, didn't just save one frightened maid's life. It transformed an empire built on fear into a legacy built on love, proving once and for all that the quietest person in any room can still become the reason everything finally changes for the better. Epilogue. 2 years after that wedding day, snow fell again across the Moretti estate, but this time it carried no threat, no memory of violence, only the quiet hush of a winter morning where a 5-month-old girl slept soundly in a nursery that had once been Damien's childhood room, repainted now in soft yellow, far removed from the cold formality his own father had once insisted upon. Emily stood at the window watching the snow accumulate on branches outside, one hand resting absently against the doorframe of the nursery, listening to the soft, even breathing of her daughter. Sophia Carter Moretti, named for Damien's mother, whose locket Emily still wore every single day, even now, even with a wedding ring resting beside it. "She's been asleep 2 hours," Damien said quietly from behind her, his voice carrying the particular softness reserved exclusively for moments like this, moments neither of them had dared imagine possible during those terrifying weeks 2 years earlier. "You should rest too." "I will. I just like watching her." Emily smiled without turning her voice, carrying quiet wonder that had never quite faded since Sophia's birth. "I keep thinking about how different this house feels now, how different everything feels." Damien crossed the room, wrapping his arms around her from behind, resting his chin against her shoulder as they both watched their daughter sleep. "Good different, I hope." "The best different." Emily turned in his embrace, studying his face with the same careful attention she'd once used to read dangerous rooms, except now she searched only for happiness, for the contentment that had slowly replaced the careful, guarded expression he'd worn when she first met him. "Do you ever think about that Christmas, the storm, every year when the first snow falls?" Damien's expression turned thoughtful, distant with memory. "I think about how close I came to losing you before I even understood what I had. I think about how angry I was, how terrified carrying you through that ballroom, not caring who watched." "I think about it too," Emily admitted. "Not with fear anymore, though, with gratitude. If that storm hadn't happened, if Vanessa hadn't done what she did, we might never have found each other," Damien finished. "Strange, isn't it, that the worst night of your life became the beginning of everything good that followed?" Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of the front door, followed by familiar voices in the hallway below. Marco now married himself to a woman named Sarah he'd met during the chaotic months following the commission hearing, and Emily's grandfather, whose health had improved so dramatically under proper care that he'd taken to walking the estate grounds daily, declaring himself younger than he'd felt in 15 years. "Is that everyone arriving already?" Emily glanced at the clock, surprised by how quickly the afternoon had progressed. "I thought the gathering wasn't until 6. Knowing Marco, he probably wanted extra time with Sophia before the chaos of guests arrives, Damien said, smiling at the predictable affection his oldest friend had developed for their daughter, an affection that had surprised everyone, given Marco's typically stoic, guarded nature. They made their way downstairs together, finding Marco already settled in the main sitting room, his wife Sarah laughing at something Emily's grandfather had said. The comfortable warmth of family, filling a space that had once echoed with fear and careful, calculated silence. "There's my favorite goddaughter's parents," Marco announced, rising to embrace Emily warmly before clasping Damien's hand. "Sophia's still sleeping." "For now," Emily said, "though I suspect that won't last long once everyone else arrives." The gathering that evening commemorated something significant, the second anniversary of the Foundation's official launch, an event that had grown from Emily's quiet determination into something that now operated across 3 states, helping hundreds of families escape the kind of crushing debt that had once defined Emily's own desperate circumstances. Throughout the evening, as guests arrived, and the house filled with warmth and laughter, entirely unlike the careful, fearful gatherings Damien's father had once hosted, Emily found herself reflecting on everything that had changed, everything that remained, everything still ahead. Dunbar arrived early. Her grandson, now a healthy, energetic 10-year-old, who'd accompanied her, immediately drawn toward the small play area Emily had set up specifically for the children of Foundation families who often visited the estate. Margaret herself had remained on staff after everything that happened 2 years earlier. Her betrayal long since forgiven her loyalty, since then absolute and unwavering. "He's grown so much," Emily said, watching the boy play with genuine warmth. "I remember when this all started, when you told us about the medical bills, about how desperate you were." "I think about it every single day," Dunbar admitted quietly. "How close I came to destroying everything good in this house because I was too afraid to simply ask for help. You and Damien taught me something I should have learned decades earlier, that asking for help isn't weakness. It's the only thing that actually saves people." The evening continued with the particular warmth that had become characteristic of every gathering at the Moretti estate since Emily had taken over its management. Genuine connection, replacing careful political maneuvering, real laughter, replacing forced pleasantries, children playing freely in rooms that had once been reserved exclusively for serious, dangerous business. It was during a quiet moment, after most guests had settled into comfortable conversation, and Sophia had been brought downstairs to be passed lovingly between various aunts and uncles who weren't related by blood, but had become family regardless, that Damien pulled Emily aside, leading her toward the same library window seat where so much of their story had unfolded. "I have something to show you," he said, producing a folder that immediately sent a flicker of old anxiety through Emily's chest. Memory of the last folder that had changed everything still vivid, despite the years that had passed. "Damien, please tell me this isn't another conspiracy." He laughed, the sound rich and genuine, in a way his laughter had rarely been before she'd entered his life. "No, nothing like that, I promise." He opened the folder, revealing not financial documents or old photographs, but architectural plans detailed and carefully drawn. "What is this?" "The Bianchi family," Damien said quietly. "I've spent the past year tracking down what happened to Frank Bianchi's daughter after the conspiracy destroyed her family. Her name is Catherine. She's nearly 40 now, living quietly in Ohio with a family of her own, completely unaware of who her father actually was or why he disappeared so suddenly when she was 16. Emily's breath caught. "You found her?" "I found her," Damien confirmed. "And I've spent months deciding how to handle this responsibly, carefully, without causing unnecessary trauma to a woman who's built a peaceful life completely separate from this world." He gestured toward the architectural plans. I want to build something, a proper memorial here on the estate, acknowledging what my father did to Frank Bianchi, and I want to establish a trust in Catherine's name, restoring some portion of what her family lost, though obviously money alone can never fully repay that debt. Tears gathered in Emily's eyes as she studied the plans, understanding the significance of what Damien was proposing. Have you contacted her yet? Not directly. I didn't want to disrupt her life without your guidance first. He took her hands gently. You're the reason I learned the value of approaching difficult truths with compassion rather than just cold calculated justice. I wanted your thoughts before moving forward. Emily considered the question seriously, drawing on everything she'd learned over the past 2 years about navigating difficult truths, about the careful balance between justice and genuine healing. Write to her first, she said finally, gently, honestly giving her the choice of how much she wants to know and how involved she wants to be. Some truths deserve to be offered as gifts, not forced as obligations. That's exactly what I was thinking, Damien said, relief crossing his features. I just needed to hear you say it. 3 months later, Catherine Bianchi Morrison arrived at the Moretti estate for the first time, nervous and uncertain, accompanied by her husband and 2 teenage children, who knew only that this visit involved some complicated family history they were still learning to understand. Emily greeted her personally at the entrance, recognizing immediately the careful, guarded posture of someone who'd spent years protecting herself from painful truths she'd never fully understood. Thank you for coming, Emily said warmly. I know this must feel strange, overwhelming even. I still don't fully understand what happened. Catherine admitted, her eyes scanning the grand entrance with obvious unease. My mother always said my father simply left, that he couldn't handle the pressure of business anymore. I never understood why we lost everything so suddenly, why we had to move away and start completely over. There's a lot to explain, Damien said, joining them, his expression carrying genuine remorse, despite having no personal responsibility for crimes committed before his birth. And I want you to know up front, nothing I tell you today comes with any expectation of forgiveness or reconciliation. I simply believe you deserve the truth finally, after 22 years. The conversation that followed, held in the same study where Emily had first discovered the conspiracy file 2 years earlier, unfolded with careful, deliberate honesty. Damien explained everything: his father's betrayal, the fabricated evidence, the systematic destruction of a family that had once been genuine friends, the territorial greed that had driven men to destroy someone they'd called brother. Catherine listened in stunned silence, tears streaming freely as pieces of her childhood confusion finally clicked into devastating clarity. My father wasn't a coward who abandoned us, she whispered finally. He was protecting us, running to keep us safe from men who would have killed us all if he'd fought back. From everything I've uncovered, yes, Damien confirmed gently. He chose exile over violence. He chose your safety over his own reputation and territory. He never told us the truth, even after everything, even watching us struggle, watching my mother work 3 jobs just to keep us fed. He never explained why. He probably believed silence was the only thing keeping you safe, Emily offered softly. Sometimes the people who love us most make impossible choices that look like abandonment, but are actually the deepest form of protection. Catherine's husband, who'd remained quiet throughout the conversation, finally spoke. Is there proof, documentation that confirms all of this actually happened the way you're describing? Damien produced copies of the original evidence, carefully organized alongside additional research his team had conducted over the past year, specifically to corroborate every detail before approaching Catherine with such a significant revelation. I established a trust 3 months ago. Damien continued, sliding additional documents across the desk. It's not nearly equivalent to what your father's territory was worth 22 years ago, but it's substantial, and it comes with no conditions attached. You're free to refuse it entirely if accepting feels wrong, given everything you're processing right now. Catherine stared at the documents for a long moment, overwhelmed by information that had completely reshaped her understanding of her own history within the span of a single conversation. I need time, she said finally. This is a lot to process. Take all the time you need, Emily said immediately. There's no expectation here except honesty. We're not asking you to forgive anyone or accept anything you're not ready for." Catherine and her family stayed at the estate for 3 days, slowly processing the revelation, asking careful questions, gradually allowing themselves to grieve a father whose memory they'd carried with confusion and unspoken resentment for over 2 decades. On the final evening, as Catherine prepared to leave, she found Emily alone in the garden. The same garden where Emily had once nearly frozen to death, now transformed with careful landscaping into something peaceful, deliberately designed to honor growth rather than commemorate trauma. "Can I ask you something?" Catherine said, approaching slowly. "Why does any of this matter to you? You're not responsible for what happened to my father. You married into this family years after everything occurred." Emily considered the question seriously, understanding the weight behind it. "Because I know what it feels like to be invisible, to have your suffering dismissed as unimportant by people too powerful to care. I know what it feels like when someone finally sees you, finally acknowledges what you've survived." She paused, watching snow-dusted roses sway gently in the evening breeze. "Your father deserved that acknowledgement 22 years ago. You deserve it now." Catherine's eyes filled with fresh tears, though these carried something gentler than the shock and grief of earlier conversations. "Thank you for finding me, for telling the truth even though it would have been easier to simply let history stay buried." "Burying truth never actually protects anyone," Emily said quietly. "It just delays the reckoning." Catherine accepted the trust eventually, several weeks after returning home, using a portion of it to finally give her father, who died 8 years earlier, still believing his daughter would never understand why he'd sacrificed everything to protect her, a proper memorial service, one that finally honored the truth of who he'd actually been. She also began visiting the Moretti estate periodically, a tentative friendship developing between her family and Damien's, built not on obligation, but on the shared understanding of what it meant to finally have painful history acknowledged honestly. Back at the estate, life continued its steady, peaceful rhythm. Sophia grew from infant to toddler, her first steps taken in the same garden where her mother had once nearly died. Her first words spoken in a house finally rebuilt on foundations of honesty and genuine care, rather than fear and calculated control. 2 years after Sophia's birth, Emily found herself pregnant again, this time with twins, the news bringing fresh joy to a household that had already learned through hard experience never to take happiness for granted. "Twins," Damien repeated, still slightly stunned, sitting beside Emily in the same doctor's office where they'd first confirmed Sophia's existence. "We're going to have 3 children." "Terrified?" Emily asked, amused by his obvious shock. "Terrified doesn't begin to cover it." He laughed, though genuine happiness radiated through every word, but also incredibly grateful. 2 years ago, I genuinely believed I'd spend my entire life building an empire I'd eventually hand over to strangers, since I never expected to find someone I trusted enough to build a real family with. And now I can't imagine my life without any of this. Without you, without Sophia, without whatever chaos these twins are about to bring into our lives." He squeezed her hand gently. "You saved me, Emily, not just that night in the storm, every single day since." The twins arrived 7 months later, a boy and girl, Damien and Emily, named after Emily's parents, ensuring that even those who'd passed before this new chapter remained honored within the family they'd created. As the household grew louder, busier, filled increasingly with the chaos and joy of 3 young children, Damien's transformation from feared Mafia boss into devoted father became increasingly apparent to everyone who'd known him before Emily's arrival. "I still remember the man who walked into that commission meeting 2 years ago," Greco told Damien during a visit to celebrate the twins' birth, watching Damien carefully balance one infant while Emily managed the other, Sophia tugging insistently at her father's sleeve, demanding attention. "I barely recognize you now." "Good. Different, I hope," Damien said, echoing words Emily had spoken years earlier. "The best different," Greco confirmed, smiling genuinely, despite his typically reserved demeanor. "Your father built an empire that controlled territory through fear. You've built something that controls hearts through genuine loyalty. I've watched enough families rise and fall in this business to recognize which foundation actually lasts." As the years continued passing, the foundation Emily had established grew into one of the most respected charitable organizations on the East Coast, eventually expanding nationally, helping thousands of families escape the kind of crushing debt and desperate circumstances that had once defined Emily's own life before that fateful Christmas Eve. Sophia, now 7 years old, had taken to accompanying her mother on foundation visits, watching Emily interact with struggling families with the same genuine compassion that had first captured Damien's attention all those years earlier. "Mom," Sophia asked one evening, watching Emily review case files at the kitchen table, "why do you work so hard helping people you don't even know?" Emily considered the question carefully, recognizing the importance of teaching her daughter the values that had shaped everything good in their family story. "Because once a long time ago, nobody helped me when I needed it most. I want to make sure other people don't have to feel that alone." "Did Daddy help you?" "Daddy saved my life," Emily said simply, smiling at the memory that no longer carried fear, only gratitude. "And then he taught me that love means choosing every single day to keep saving each other." That winter, exactly 7 years after the blizzard that had changed everything, the entire family gathered for their traditional Christmas Eve celebration. Not the formal, fear-driven banquet Damien's father had once hosted, but something warmer, more genuine, filled with laughter and music, and the comfortable chaos of 3 young children opening presents while extended family and close friends filled the same ballroom that had witnessed both tragedy and transformation. As snow fell gently outside the windows, Damien found Emily watching their children play. The same quiet contentment she'd carried for years now settled permanently into her expression. 7 years, he said softly, wrapping his arms around her from behind, just as he had that first morning in Sophia's nursery. 7 years since that storm nearly took everything from us. "And gave us everything instead," Emily replied, leaning back into his embrace. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if Vanessa hadn't accused you that night, if we'd never discovered any of this?" Emily considered the question, watching Sophia laugh delightedly as she helped her younger siblings build something elaborate out of building blocks, watching her grandfather, still healthy, still vibrant, still finding joy in every single day he spent surrounded by the family he'd helped build, share stories with Marco's children about adventures from decades earlier. "I think," Emily said finally, "that some storms exist precisely to clear away everything false, everything built on fear and lies, so that something true and lasting can finally grow in its place." Damien pressed a gentle kiss against her temple, watching their children, their family, their legacy unfold before them with the kind of peace neither had ever expected to find. "I love you," he said simply. "More today than I did 7 years ago. More than I thought possible when I first carried you through that ballroom, terrified I'd already lost you before truly understanding what I had." "I love you too," Emily whispered. "Completely, unconditionally, forever." Outside, snow continued falling steadily across the estate that had once been defined entirely by fear, now transformed completely into a home built on the unshakable foundation of genuine love, hard-won trust, and the unwavering belief that even the darkest storms can lead eventually to the warmest light. That Christmas Eve, 7 years after everything began, didn't just mark another anniversary of survival. It stood as living proof that the quietest, most overlooked person in any room can become the very reason an entire empire finally learns what it means to love completely, fearlessly, and forever.